Hello, hello, everyone. Hope you're all having a lovely Wednesday morning, evening, afternoon, or I guess it would be Thursday morning.
And obviously, this side it is literally midnight. Holy crap sticks, but what better way to spend midnight than discussing elves and rating them on a tier scale, because that's what we like to do.
That's the proper thing you should always do with elves, is judge them.
Totally.
It's a proper hobby, especially for high elves. That's the way they'd want it.
So I'm particularly looking forward to this one because there's a nice mixture of different characters that we're going to be working our way through here as we discuss each of the Phoenix Kings, some of which are super famous, some of which are really well known, one or two of which are going to be, I'm going to guess, right from the outset, a bit controversial. And we, between us, will have our own opinions, and inevitably, so will you. And I would very much like, during the course of this, to make sure that you are not only welcome to throw your comments all over the place down in the chat, but actively encouraged. And when you disagree with us, tell us.
Yeah, so what we're gonna do for this, so this is a tier list stream, which for those of you that are not familiar with the format, it's a pretty famous, just stupid but fun thing to do, is that we have this. Actually, it'd probably be better to do this. There we go. Where we have a tier list up here in the corner that goes from S to D, and it basically is tiers that we will be putting the Phoenix Kings in after we talk about all of them. So we will talk through them in order. This has them in alphabetical order, but we're going to go in chronological order to talk about the various things and the goods, the bads, the uglies, and then we're going to try and figure out a place to put them on the tier list. Now, what we're going to do, I think, for funsies, is that while me and Andy are going to talk a fair bit about each of the Phoenix Kings, y'all, chat, are ultimately going to have the big deciding power over where they go. So we'll talk about them. We'll make discussions and little tidbits about like, oh, why they should maybe be in this tier or this tier. And we'll try and kind of get a consensus, like a ballpark of maybe where they should be. And then we'll do little polls. I'm going to let you all know now that while we are going to talk about some really cool lore and also some really goofy lore, because some of the Phoenix Kings bring up some really bizarre concepts.
And they also bring up some interesting questions as well, which I think is going to be super fun for us to dive into as we go.
Yeah, I am anticipating the stream will be very dumb, but that's also kind of what I thought about the first Tarmacon brother, and that ended up being a whole thing. So
yeah,
we'll see what happens.
I have a completely different expectation here. This is ultimately what we kind of do. We discuss lore, and this is going to be a stream that is decidedly lore heavy in that we're going to be diving into the Phoenix Kings of the Elves. Now, you might not know this, but once upon a time, many, many years ago, when I was writing for the second edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I was actually lined up by Black Library to do a book about the Phoenix Kings. And I was going to be doing a complete breakdown of each one of them, their primary feats and defeats, their great peaks, and their often extremely significant lows. And for a variety of reasons, that book didn't come about, the biggest one of which was that Black Library stopped doing books like that. So it was not going to happen because Games Workshop changed its direction, so that book didn't happen. But it did mean that all the way back then, and we are talking now, about 20 years ago when that was, I had already formed a pretty strong idea, at least in my head, of what each one of them were like. Now, I will admit that my view of them is thus different to everybody else's, because everybody else, when they sit down and they go through the Phoenix Kings and they go, here's Phoenix King 1, this is what they did. Number 2, this is what they did. Number 3, they run off the existing lore. I'd planned a book, and that meant that I had to add to the existing lore, and I had a host of stories that basically never came to pass. And thus, in my head, the lesser detailed Phoenix Kings, in my head, are much more detailed because they're the ones that took an awful lot more of my work, because we don't really need to have another big 50-page discussion about Anarion, the first Phoenix King. So he wasn't pushed aside. There was quite a lot in there about him, but the Phoenix Kings that had less work inside the existing lore were going to have more. So I have a somewhat unique view. Today, none of that counts. It's only going to be what is generally out there. And for those of you who want to look out and try to get an idea of where we're going to be drawing the primary ideas, beyond the obvious, go check a wiki. It's mostly up there anyway. Do go dive into the High Elf army lists because they are by far the biggest sources of the core lore.
Yeah, the High Elf 8th edition book, I will say, I was actually talking about this on a stream last night, of that people give him a lot of grief for like his rules writing, but I will say that when it came to like lore writing and the way he organized a lot of his books, Matt Ward did a really good job with the Elf books, in that instead of just like giving a timeline and then like a real weird like splatter shot of events, he organized all 3 Elf books into just different ages that covers the entire timeline. It's like, oh, that's really nice, because that means you could go to any point in the Warhammer world and read what was going on with the elves at that point. And it's a very, very nice organization system. Would have been nice if all the other books did that.
Yeah, and not only that, what I particularly enjoyed about Matt Ward's Elf books in the 8th edition was that they were, unlike most of the other army lists, linked. They were all speaking in a similar tone. They were also discussing similar points. Each one of them, for example, gives you a nice little lowdown of what happens according to each one of the different primary elf groups. When you die, what happens to the elf soul? Because they all have their own beliefs. And throughout the course of it, you get a nice little snapshot of each of the elven gods and how they're expressed differently amongst them all. And of course, when it comes to the high elves, we get a big, long chat about each one of the lovely Phoenix Kings.
Yeah. So, once again, this is going to be a pretty chill, fun stream. We'll see where it takes us, but I honestly do think this will be a good time. And this is one of the easiest ones to do a tier list of the various leaders for, because to put it very frankly, that a lot of the other ones are they're just a lot of gaps. Whether you're dealing with emperors or dwarf high kings or ever-chosens. It's a total toss-up. There are some other, if y'all like the tier making stream, please let us know, like leave comments and like hit us up and stuff on Twitter or whatever, because if y'all really like this, then we will find other topics that we could do this for. Like I could very easily think like we could do like a Council of 13 one. That one could be fun because we know the 13 members of the Council of 13. So like that could be fun.
I have opinions there too.
Yeah. But we don't want to do it if people don't want to watch it.
Oh, that'd be super fun.
You need to know each of their inflections. And
yes, I am coming now. Yes, that'd be super fun. Also, don't only give us ideas of whether you liked it or not, but also if you've got ideas of how you think we could do another one with a different subject that we haven't considered, bring it up. When it comes to things like obviously the Everchosens, which I flippantly discarded, clearly we can't do that, but we could, as another idea, perhaps do a deep dive into the lore of a potential Everchosen. We could build one in the same way that we built the various brothers of Tamarkan. Okay, that could be a bit. Well, not just fun, that could be super fun. So if you've got any ideas like that, do ping them to us. Now, the best place to do that is over on Discord, but the best place to share the word and make everyone else know is places like X or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. Throw it out there, because in the end, it's always nice if more of you turn up. And that's the best place for that to happen. But if you do have ideas, dive into Discord. I'll set up yet another unique thread. So if you want to go and throw ideas out, do throw them in down there in Lorehammer or Sotek's Discord.
Yep. And, standard preamble about super chats. We'll do them in batches. So we'll go ahead.
Actually, on that, because we're clearly going to be discussing certain characters and you're going to have ideas that you bring up, it's possible we'll have quite a lot of people throwing ideas up. So the super chats will definitely take precedence. I'm sorry. It's not just that we like to make money. We do. But if people are going to be throwing money at us, we're always going to say thank you very much and bring it up. So sorry, not sorry would be a better way of putting it. Thanks very much for buying us dinner. I mean, who doesn't like to eat? But if you've got ideas as they're going, be aware that your chat might come up a little bit later. We are going to try and be relatively spry with it. So what we'll do is we'll clear out our first super chats before we get going. And as they come in, if it's immediately and obviously pertinent, we'll do our best to try and bring it up in time. But be aware, we are going super chill for this one because we have a number of Phoenix Kings to get through.
Yeah, so we got 12 to do. So, Aaron, hello, glorious Lorebeards. I'm enjoying your ranking of Elgi by how many grudges we will have. I will be listing while trying not to have a Slayer's Rage and Elden Ring kicks my teeth in. Well, at least
Elden
you got
Ring
something
kicks your teeth in at some point.
Yeah, at least you've got something to direct your rage at. Saul Eater, are there any Asur that feel that the line of Anarian should hold the Phoenix Crown support a non-Malekith member?
So, are there any high elves that feel like the line of Anarian should hold the Phoenix Crown and support a non-Malekith member? The answer to that is probably. The high elves, just to answer this one quickly, are some of the most political and really involved species of the Warhammer world. They are always politicking, which means that anything that could potentially be rallied around at some point will be. And the line of Anarian, the first Phoenix King, who we will be going on to very swiftly, is clearly something that can be rallied around, even though it is broadly perceived to be cursed. After all, we all know what sort of things it can spit out. Our good old Teclis and Tyrians, for example. So I think the answer to that is clearly yes, but the lore tends not to dwell on it because the lore and the general stories that are told tend to dwell on pretty much only named characters because that's where they go.
You do
see
some of this in the Tyrion and Teclis storyline, the Tyrion and Teclis trilogy, where there's a lot of people that want Tyrion to be Phoenix King and he's not super into it, and it's a whole
into something else.
Yeah, he's a little busy, but which he's very much like his great grandsire Morellian, who wasn't really interested in being Phoenix King. He just wanted to protect his sister or do something with his sister, supposedly protect his sister, which I'm sure he did. But elves are. Mr. Bourne, better make Malekith S tier, otherwise he'll harbor another grudge and we'll get the Sundering Mark II Electric Boogaloo.
I think it's fair to say that Malekith, Malarian, the witch, whatever you want to call him, is going to be one of the more controversial figures.
He'll be the last one that will come out. Who's your favorite Little Phoenix King? Well, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that this one.
There's not that many.
I have a lot of affection for all of them because I've thought about them deeply and different ways to potentially tell their tale.
Will Malekith be included? Yes, because canonically he becomes a Phoenix King. Like, you don't have to like it, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
100%. Not including Malekith would be wrong.
Yeah, there's a Phoenix King that I don't like, but it doesn't stop him from having been a Phoenix King, which we'll get to him. Gideon, yep, if you don't put my boy Caradriel at least B, I swear I will be mildly disappointed, but respect your different opinion. There's a real threat right there. Was there a particular reason the Phoenix Kings got less time in the light or a model in comparison to other high elf characters? So this is a tricky thing of that if you're dealing with Finnebar's realistically who you're talking about, not really the others because they're just not super relevant. But Finnebar kind of got pigeonholed really heavy because they made Tyrion, they were like, oh well, Finnebar is he's I don't know, an explorer, he's kind of a vague political figure. And when he finally got some decent expansion, most notably in Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, they're like, no, he's a badass. We looked at this guy's history and he's amazing. And he's got amazing art and a big flaming sword and all this stuff. And you're like, oh yeah, he looks really cool. And GW just was like, nah.
Yeah. The long story short is blame the very first High Elf Army list. That very first High Elf Army list selected a bunch of characters and Finnebar was put in he's above them all. He's the Phoenix King. He's unlikely to be going to war very often. We won't drop him in the game. We'll put the characters that are going to war that are going to be seen in the battlefield. So Finnebar didn't arrive there, and every successive army list after that did not chase the Finnebar gold. And it sucks because Finnebar is a great character. We'll be discussing him near the end section of this stream because Finnebar has a lot of pretty cool stories under his belt.
Hello, just started a new job, so I haven't got a stream in a while. Well, congrats on the new job. Hope it's going well for you. Hope it's all going really, really well. Brathy,
great to see you.
There's only been 2 rightful SDR Phoenix Kings, right?
I think that will be an interesting argument that we will definitely take up when we hit the inevitable Malekith part.
Yeah. Wow, all the special characters are showing up to the stream. I'm expecting this to be interesting.
I expect this to be extremely interesting. Oh, really, Teclis? Get out of here. Thanks very much for that. Appreciate it.
Stream of Nehekaran Kings, maybe. That would be so messy. Also, thanks to the stream. Here's some beer money. Oh, well,
thanks very much for the beer money. And I think that Nehekaran Kings would definitely be something of interest, but the problem is that a chunk of them just have names. They're just like a litany of names.
Yeah, we know nothing about them.
Yeah.
It's bad when if you go into the Total War Warhammer tech tree and it's got like the different dynasties and their associated king. That's more information than what the actual background of the setting provides you.
Yeah, it's a pain.
Sawletter, isn't the whole Malekith situation similar to the historical Jacobites? A line with a claim to the throne that keeps invading to try and take it back.
Yeah, as a Scottish person, I'm obviously quite savvy with the whole tale. And yeah, kind of. There's definitely quite a lot of bridges and similarities to it. You'll tend to find that there are only so many tales that you can tell when it comes to kings and queens and bloodlines and taking, losing, all the rest of it. So you'll find that not only are there similarities to the historical Jacobites, there are to many other bloodlines too throughout the course of history. And you'll find that somewhat culturally, all of them have been a bit of an influence on the various tales that was put together. I mean, often the story parts and at the original point were put together by Bill King. And Bill's stuff, it will have been influenced by all the stuff he read as a kid. So yeah, sure, there's going to be influence.
Yep. Blaza, good day, Andy and Sotek. Homesick today, so I can finally watch you here in Australia, painting some Space Wars. Thanks for all you do. Well, we appreciate it. Hope you feel better soon, and, rock and stone, as they say.
Yeah, indeed. Get well soon.
Aaron, I officially put Rolana in the book because boss 30 deaths. Well, I hope you bring her down. Good luck.
Wow.
To be frank, from the perspective of Chaos, Calor II is S tier. Wreck 2 of their most powerful enemies. Unfortunately for him, we are Andy and I are not Chaos gods, contrary to some popular beliefs.
There was a really, really good meme, though, that went up in the Lawhammer Discord today, which was basically an image of me and an image of Zinch, and the government says they're both the same. It was a really nice meme.
I am a strong subscriber of that theory. I've watched your streams.
Yeah, we've been doing some side streams actually. Quite enjoying those.
Very excited. All right, we ready to get into it?
Yeah, I'm well ready. Are we going to start at the very beginning?
Yeah, we're going to go in chronological order to just not have any bias, not have any. And make sure to keep it relatively straightforward. So we're going to start with the big man himself, the living god, Anarion the Defender.
Right. So I'm going to lay out a couple of things that we're going to try and do as we go along, as I shift my camera so that I can better see the screens. I shall allow Sotek, in his wonderful, graceful position of Loremaster of all things marvelous, to dive in. And if any particular comments come in that influence what's going on, I'm going to bring them up. They're not being brought up necessarily for Sotek to discuss, but if they are super chats, then we may have a quick stop. But if you do have anything that you think is important to discuss, drop it down in the chat. Inevitably, we can hopefully work it together. But because there's two of us, it gives us an opportunity to hopefully get both the chat in place and also your chat too. Because in the end, you're going to be the one that's going to be voting where each one of these Phoenix Kings go. So your input to this is super important.
Yeah. So we have first and foremost Anarion the Defender. Now, in the interest of keeping things interesting, I am going to just give you a quick couple of points about it because everybody knows Anarion. I mean, he is quite literally the poster child for Phoenix Kings that most people know because he's so important to the setting. I mean, some often describe him as the savior of the world. He's very highly thought of by virtually all the different elves, which is a feat in and of itself, where most of them regard him quite highly. Though there are some darker sides to Anarion. You do have, of course, the aspect that, he was the first Phoenix King. He sacrificed himself for the good of the elves and took in a god into his own flesh, married the Ever Queen. He had some kids. He was holding off chaos, but couldn't be everywhere at once. And then his wife and his kids were killed. His wife actually killed, and his children believed killed. And he kind of lost himself to grief and rage, and he drew the Sword of Cain. And by doing so, he doomed the entirety of the elven race.
Yeah. And I think this is something that we should definitely consider as we're working our way through it. So Anarion is the first Phoenix King. And he does a host of things that are not just epic. They're beyond epic. He not only appealed to a god and got a god, Asuryan in this case, who said he would never, ever, 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 ever influence the real world, and persuaded him to do so by effectively trying to kill himself, and throwing himself in as a sacrifice into the Phoenix, well, the Great Flame. And then saved the elves and arguably the world like he was a cheerleader in Lost. Not only did he not Lost? Oh, heroes. Like, what the frick? I'm losing it. Not only did he do that, he then went to kick ass and chew gum as he took down chaos, but he then drew the Sword of Cain, which you could argue doomed the world. So while we have on one side, hey, I saved the world. On the other side, hey, he doomed it. He also didn't last all that long. He is not a Phoenix King that lives very long. So I'm only saying this before we get all of the inevitable S tier, because clearly he is. S tier! Let's have a little think about it. How are we defining S tier if they are just super duper awesome, they're like gods? Clearly, there's going to be very few who can stand against Asuryan. If it's there for the greatness that they did as Phoenix King, well, he did great things, but he also did terrible things. It is through his action that inevitably the Dark Elves become a thing. The sundering happens. So it's worth having a think about that as you're determining where you think Asuryan goes, because we all know that everyone thinks he probably should be S tier. So I'm trying to add just a touch of doubt.
I feel like this is a bit of a bizarre angle to take on it, but yeah, so that's the thing to ultimately consider, because I personally would argue that we're going to have a more interesting...
I'm just going to bring this one up because Tommy Shanahan, you're right. Many of the original Dark Elves, particularly those that were depicted in places like Fighting Fantasy, early Games Workshop adjacent, were painted with blue faces. And many of the original ones were painted with a sort of palish blue type face. You were not mad. That definitely happened.
That's actually really interesting. So one of the things that I think it's going to make for the most interesting discussion is...
I'll see you.
Yeah, we'll bring it up in just a second. That we should aim for, I think, S tier being the Phoenix Kings that have the overall best balance of like a Phoenix King that was good for the High Elves, that was a like good and noble leader and had like a really effective rule. If bad things happen during their reign, then that needs to take points away, as opposed to like the most kick-ass Phoenix King. Or the most, because we're rating them as Phoenix Kings, not as warriors, not as demigods. And honestly, like, Asuryan, he was okay as a Phoenix King. Like, he started off strong. He started off great. But, I mean, when you really delve into, like, what his court was like over in Enlek, it's a little spooky. Orion should have been a Phoenix King. That's my chaotic choice.
Right, so I'm going to bring up Dynamant. So, potential hot take. I think Asuryan is B tier overall. Ooh. The first half of his reign is S tier. Seems fair. With the sacrifice and becoming the embodiment of Asuryan, etc. However, taking up the Widowmaker, not letting Kalador do the ritual, even though they were losing until right at the end, thus letting many elves and others die beforehand, and creating the cruel court in Nagarath. So, Dynaman, I think that everything you say there should definitely be taken into consideration, because it is fair to say that let's consider and let's state out exactly what it was like back then. Fucking chaos. This is the cataclysm. Everything's going wrong. And Asuryan is born into this. He is born into an eternal war against demons, against corrupted mortals of all sorts, and he is slaying those bar stewards left, right, and center, traveling the world as he does so. He is the one who, as the elves were created, pretty much falling back to their last stand, persuaded a god to join the fray, and then, as an avatar of that god, kicked ass and chewed gum. He was not a good king at this point, it's worth noting. What he was a desperate warrior who succeeded in persuading a god to help out. And through doing that, he became the king. He marries the Everqueen. He has kids. There is a moment of momentarily peace over Ulthuan, but inevitably they come back again, and the war slowly but surely crushes towards its end. Widowmaker is drawn when he's in his deepest moment of despair, and everything goes wrong after that. It is, however, worth noting that most of that happens right at the very, 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 very end of his reign, where it really goes.
The last, 20 years-ish?
Yeah. Having said that, though, his reign wasn't that long. And we also have to consider Marathi.
Yeah.
Was Marathi a mistake, or was Marathi not a mistake? This is something that we could probably argue for some time. If you go with some writers of Marathi, Marathi wasn't just a mistake. It was the biggest mistake that any elf could make, because he effectively invited chaos into the heart of the elven lands. Alternatively, though, with other readings of Marathi, she is literally almost a pure representation of what it is to be an elf, in that she has absolute contempt for chaos and uses chaos. Slaanesh is nothing more than a tool in her hands. So there are different ways that this can be perceived, but there was definitely corruption brought into the court, and the court of Nagarai does change. Does this impact his S-tier rating that many feel that he should have? Or do you think, in balance, everything that he did, he after all created the very nature of being a Phoenix King in the first place? He persuaded a god. He was wandering around kicking in greater demons like they were nurglings. He's a pretty impressive figure.
Polls are up, chat. Polls are up. So I'm going to be giving out rankings based on what I see in the chats, because YouTube limits how many options I can put. So for Anarian, based on the feedback we're seeing from chat, I have put S, A, or B. Because most people seem to feel that he's in that ballpark. So go vote whether he should be S tier, A tier, or B tier.
S, A, B seems right. Now, if you want my general opinion, because I think we should do our call as you're doing your votes, and I'd rather do it before you finish your votes, because that's more fun, because we might influence you. Okay, so I feel it is obvious he's S tier. It is obvious. He is S tier. He literally did everything that established what the modern elves are. However, if we take it on balance, and we are thinking about the balance here, was he a good king? Did he build strength for the elves? Did he have a long-lasting legacy? The answer to some of those questions is yes and no. His legacy was extraordinary. He pretty much made the elves and the rest of the world survive, but simultaneously he doomed it. And because, on balance, all of the good that he did was also undone by the mistakes that he made, it makes it, for me, very difficult to conclude it should be S. I sit on a very surprised Andy A tier.
I agree, I actually concur. That I think he
I'm going
is
A.
overall like a pretty amazing Phoenix King. However, the bads are quite bad. Of that, a good king should listen to counsel, and Anarian was actually pretty bad about listening to counsel, whether it was from Kalador or Marathi in different parts of his life. And also, there's a small part of me that's kind of like, he is creating the role of the Phoenix King also deeply harmed the elves, because it weakened the role of the Everqueen.
Massively.
So, like, he had some really strong positives, but he also introduced some legacies that really messed up the elves forever. Like, they never recovered from it.
And I think this is although again it feels a little bit like this was posted with a tongue firmly wedged into a cheek. Just ask a George R. R. Martin question: what was his tax policy? And again, Anarian was initially reigning during a period when tax policies weren't really an option. We were at eternal war. But nevertheless, Nagarai's court was a proper court, and I think it's also fair to say his tax policies weren't necessarily great.
I gotta say, I need someone to make me a meme of like the cataclysm being unleashed and there being some high elf going, but the economy! It's like the world's ending.
Teclis is your ultimate ancestor. Perhaps a little bit more respect would be expected from you, but I don't disagree. If you want someone dead, call Anarian. If you want amazing kingdom management, probably call someone else. And you know what? It's not unfair. And I think you're going to find that as we move through the Phoenix Kings, this is going to be somewhat of a theme, in that they tend to be very good at something, but not very rarely good at everything. I mean, indeed, in terms of the building of elven characters, it makes sense because they tend to be obsessively focused on one aspect of their life anyway. So I kind of love that. So, yeah, how's our voting going? How much longer are we going to leave it?
Actually, pretty good participation. Thank you all for voting. And both in Twitch and YouTube, A tier comes out on top with about. I'd have to do the mental math.
Oh, the dwarf players out there are laughing. Yeah, I think this is fair. For as much as I laugh, I think that in almost any other poll, it would make sense to put him in as S. It just sort of would because he's an Aryan, but still, yeah, A.
Yeah, just because you said that, I just imagined a group of dwarves being like, "Their first king is only A tier." And they're like laughing.
Yep, totally.
All right. So we have Anarian the Defender up in A tier.
Wow.
That being said, so me and Andy will have some control. A for Asuryan and Anarian. Yeah, there you go. I mean, to be fair, I also consider Anarian or Asuryan kind of an A tier god. He does some questionable things as well. But me and Andy will have some power in this vote, which is that if two Phoenix Kings end up in the same tier, the further left they are, the more superior they are within that tier. And that's what me and Andy get to do, is that if y'all put two Phoenix Kings in the same tier, me and Andy get to decide how far left they go versus their fellows.
And I'm particularly looking forward to disagreeing with Sotek on everything, because that'll make it much more fun.
Andy thinks I'm going to fight him on elf lore. He's got another thing coming. I'm just going to go,
yeah, sure. So, B, we're going off to Belshazzar. Since we've gone A to B.
Yeah, so we have Belshazzar the Explorer, which is in some. So Belshazzar the Explorer, it was the first Phoenix King to take place after Anarian, which was kind of an interesting decision by the elves to carry on the name of the Phoenix King because he's not really like Anarian. He does not take a god into himself. He doesn't throw himself into the flames and burn until he literally dies to be reincarnated with a god. Instead, it's more of a new political role that has a lot of ritual associated with it, but is very, very different, far more mortal and mundane. To all my fellow dwarf lovers, it shows up this I'll give mediocre kings. But
just to bring that up, look, purple burglar alarm. I don't come from the West Coast. I have no issues with it at all in the slightest. And indeed, purple being one of my favorite colors, and burglar alarms being something that I really should have more of. I should probably go buy myself a purple burglar.
No. You need purple flood alarms. This is what we need to have in the law.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, holy shit! My house gets flooded all the time.
So the Belshazzar, pretty interesting king overall. Of that, after Anarian dies, all the princes get together and they come to the decision that Anarian was super awesome, but he was a little scary towards the end there, and they want a king that's not as scary, and they want someone that is peacetime. So they overlook Malekith because they think that he's a little bit too much like his father, and they decide to go with Belshazzar instead, who, as his name implies, had been exploring quite a bit. He had wandered a lot of different parts of the world and had kind of shown up not too unrecently, and he had a good knowledge of what was going on outside, which was another really favorable thing about him, is that the elves wanted to turn their attention outwards. So he takes over as Phoenix King, and he had a rather interesting reign. Belshazzar reigns over the discovery of the Dwarven kingdoms, and making a good relationship with them. He even eventually travels to the World's Edge Mountains and declares an oath of friendship with High King Story Whitebeard. He oversees a lot of the reconstruction of Ulthuan, which had been savaged pretty badly, of course, by the Cataclysm and the ritual, which the summoning of the Vortex was nasty. It was not like a gentle affair for the island. So he oversaw a lot of reconstruction. The first explorers to Lustria, which did not go well for those particular explorers. They came back, and the one survivor told him about Lustria, and he made a decree that the elves should not go to Lustria. But he oversaw a lot of trade, a lot of growth, the formation of the elven colonies. He visited the elven colonies. And most notably, he had to deal with the very sudden and alarming rise of cults in Ulthuan society, where
I'm gonna possibly disagree slightly there. Because it's very easy to go, it was sudden, but his rule was over 1,600 years.
True.
He was not around for a blink of an eye like Anarion. Anarion was barely Phoenix King. He was pretty much, in elven terms, I'm king, I'm dead. Where Belshazzar, by comparison, rebuilds Ulthuan, completely colonizes the world, and spreads elves everywhere. Whenever you hear the terms golden age of the elves or any equivalent, this is the era. This is when it occurred. This was before we have anything like dark elves or wood elves or anything else. This is the great spread out towards what will one day become the other kingdoms as they are going elsewhere. But this is, relatively surprisingly, one of the highest points that the elves will ever have. If you want to give this some sort of real world equivalent, this is the British Empire at its peak, because they're colonizers. They go all over the world and they pretty much go, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Here's our colonies. We completely colonized the old world. We've gone down to the Southlands. We've gone over to Lustria. Let's go back from Lustria. We've gone all the way around the world. They completely circumnavigate the world during this time. And there is over 1,000 years of almost complete peace. 1,000 years. Compare this to Anarion and his flash in the pan rule. 1,000 years. Then, because of their extraordinary development, and you could argue it's reached the point of almost indolence, the old cults begin to rise. And to begin with, in our very first edition descriptions of these, this was the old pleasure cults of Slaanesh. But this later becomes the darker half, the underworld gods of the elves who start rising up, and cults begin forming that are perhaps not necessarily positive. And largely because, you could argue, of Anarion. And the influence that he had has begun to slowly seep out. His wife, Morothy, the influence of Malekith as well, the influence of others throughout the course of this time. It is slowly but surely not so much collapsing, but becoming much more indulgent, as elves tend to indulge themselves when they're given too much time. And they do. This is also a fine example for us to go, wait a minute, how long do elves live? This is going to become a bit of a topic.
Oh, yeah, we'll have a whole one particular
for an easy 1,000, almost 700 years of reign. He could already have been a good couple of thousand years already. He could already have been old. So it's worth noting that this king is contrary to many people's expectation of him, because they generally only speak about him at the end of his rule. And what happens when that rule ends, and by the gods does it end badly. But can you judge this Phoenix King by those last, often like 2 or 3 years, where enormous powers were working against him? Or should you look at the 1,600 and whatever years it is that he manages to rule, not just in peace, but in extraordinary peace, where the elves rule the world?
Yeah, so a couple of things that are worth bringing up about him, and some things that happened during his reign. Like Andy said, I'm glad Andy brought this up. He is the longest reigning Phoenix King. No one else gets close at about 1,700 years as king. He also oversees, like Andy said, a global empire, which is busy. One of the things that, if you read through the Malekith novels, is levered against him as a potentially bad thing, though we'll talk about how you can view this, is that
Malekith.
Yeah, is that he didn't have a very good reign on, or a very good hold necessarily on some people that he should have, being the likes of Morathi and Malekith. That Malekith, many of the elves, not many, but there were a lot of people that were loyal to Morathi and Malekith in particular, who felt very much that a lot of Belshazzar's glory was actually Malekith's glory that Belshazzar simply took credit for. It was Malekith that met the dwarves. It was Malekith who was best friends with Snorri Whitebeard. And then Belshazzar just kind of walks up and is like, oh yeah, oath of friendship, yada, yada. Same thing with the colonies. There are some of the colonies that were resentful towards Belshazzar because they felt that he was just kind of back in Ulthuan, not doing anything, which is not true. He was very busy because he was running Ulthuan. But some of the colonies felt that he was, lording over them from a distance and didn't understand what they were dealing with and going through.
We have colonies.
Yeah. But there are some other things that a lot of people know about and that are kind of interesting. So Belshazzar is responsible for when he realized that the pleasure cults were becoming a notable issue, which took many hundreds of years. He was the one that actually established that the Swordmasters of Hoeth would operate as essentially the secret police, that they would track down these various pleasure cults and purge them out.
The White Tower is built yet, is it?
You're right.
Masters, we know because there's no White Tower yet. So there's definitely one of the big problems with elf lore in general is that they've been written by different folks, and some of them have no concept at all of what the elves are like, nor have they necessarily read all the books. So yeah, there's some conflicting bits and pieces there. There's something for you to.
Maybe that was the later team that did that, and maybe the pleasure cults make a resurgence, and I just.
But regardless, the pleasure cults eventually rise up. This becomes a massive problem for Belshazzar, and good old Malekith swoops in to save the day. Because at the heart of it, who would have realized Belshazzar was behind all of it, wasn't he?
Yeah, Belshazzar was truly the worst king. That's why when Malekith confronted him, he committed suicide. Obviously.
I mean, there we go. Right. So I have some relatively strong opinions on this one that I felt that Games Workshop didn't service this particular Phoenix King at all well, because they wrote a very clear background and then focused on Malekith. So I'm going to lay it out exactly as I generally feel the background makes it, not what I was going to turn it into, my silly little book that I was going to write one day. But this was one of the Phoenix Kings I was going to spend a significant amount of time with because it's the longest reign. And he reigns over not only 1,600 years of prosperity and effectively puts the elves on the map to rule the world. He does something that none of the other Phoenix Kings does. He makes the elves a thing. A world-spanning force. He rules the waves, bluntly. There are so many British colonial let's say connections that you can make here, because this is pretty much at the peak of empire. They have an empire that spans the world and it lasts for a long time. The Wood Elves wouldn't exist without him. The Dark Elves, indeed, as they moved out, probably wouldn't exist without him. Indeed, Ulthuan in its current state would not exist without him. He established what being an elf is. The previous Phoenix King didn't do that. All he did was give Belshazzar an opportunity to figure out what elves are without their gods sitting amongst them. And Belshazzar gave an answer. And the answer is, we are the rulers of the world, and we are the ones that make a difference. And they were. No other way of putting it. 1,600 years of rule. And it got brought down by the only thing that could bring down an elf. Another elf. And indeed, the son of Anarion himself. Anarion, dude, you should have been S tier, but you done fucked up. So I am. Have you put the poll up yet? Because I don't want to say where I'm going to sit.
Poll is up. Poll is up. Go vote.
Okay, so I am, contrary to my own expectation when we started this, I am going to put my first claim for what I feel is an S tier Phoenix King, because I feel everybody focuses only on what Malekith did at the end to him. And I do not think that in any way reflects the enormous impact that he made, not just upon the elves, but upon the world.
So Grizz pulls up an interesting comment here of that. Couldn't you argue that the Sundering was a break along the fault lines that were laid down in Belshazzar's reign? And I do think that I agree with Andy that this kind of lies to the fault of GW not exploring his reign very well and focusing so much on Malekith. In that, I think you could do a summarize. You could summarize that there is some kind of weakening within Ulthuan itself that isn't just to lay at the feet of Marathi and the pleasure cults, where something that Ulthuan, because it didn't just break down of like Nagarythe seceded. It was like, oh, it's father versus son and mother versus daughter and yada yada, which deeply seems to imply a much deeper
I have an opinion here.
Yeah, go for it.
Belshazzar held it together for 1,600 years when Narian already broke it. You are looking at it back to front. Belshazzar kept it together. Belshazzar turned Malekith into a force of good until eventually he wasn't. Belshazzar was ultimately the only thing that made it all work. The elves are already broken. They're cursed by the actions of previous A tier and Aryan. Along comes B, Belshazzar. We've done with A. We're about to move on to C after this, by the way. Although, do we go on to M? Anyway, that all aside, my argument would be, because I love doing controversial arguments, that he was what held it all together, and it was his death that caused it to fall apart.
I like it. All right, and it seems that most folks agree, as Belshazzar is Anarian was like close and difficult for people to decide. Like it was very split. Belshazzar is overwhelmingly S tier.
Well, there we go.
Though there was a hilarious 6% of people on YouTube that felt he was C tier, which is just funny.
Hey, Darius, I'm just going to have to bring up this one because I hate this. It's such a human tale that they often tell with Finnebar. Particularly given that it doesn't understand the nature of the relationship between the Everqueen and the Phoenix King anyway, where their marriage is not marriage as it's generally understood to be amongst everyone else. If it was, there would be some very weird incestuous relationships going on, which already there are. And the more you go into the bloodlines of the Everqueen and the Phoenix Kings, the more you go, wait a minute, aren't they just all, it's all gone a little bit Targar in here? So the answer is, it's a bit odd.
Never mind. It was apparently only like 5%, according to Bearded Freckle. That's one of those things that comes very much from like 1D4 chan and like people that just don't understand the setting. And those are funny, but it's annoying when they become like real cultural zeitgeist ideas. Yeah. And that's just one of them. And it's a little like, But the community has spoken. Belshazzar, if I can find him, there we go. Belshazzar the Explorer jumps up as our first.
Although, interestingly, just for curiosity, that picture is actually originally Tyrion.
Wow, that's a very different Tyrion.
Yep.
Hey,
Tyrion and Teclis, as it was shown in the very first High Elf Army list.
Also, I want to take a very brief moment to just share this delightful meme that Hawk was so kind to send me. Where did I put it? Here, come here, open. Oh no, it cut off. Hold on.
Oh, what's the bottom bit? I can't see the bottom.
Let's see. View. There we go.
There we go.
As Anarian is fighting the Kari.
So next question is, are we going to see with not literally going to C, but are we going to our C or are we going to M? Because really, who's the next Phoenix King?
So I will note one last thing actually before we leave this Phoenix King behind. Is that another really, really sad thing? If you want to feel really bummed about Belshazzar, which is fun to do, a really sad thing to know about Belshazzar is that he genuinely cared very, very deeply for Malekith and basically saw Malekith as a son. And before Malekith killed him, he was legitimately considering like stepping down from the Phoenix throne and advocating for Malekith to become Phoenix King. But Malekith was unfortunately twisted and really possessed by his own paranoia and agreed at that point and made a really bad, rash decision. So just let that horrible note of history hover in your brain. Anywho, next we're on to a Phoenix King that technically is Emmerich, but not actually.
Yes,
that's not what people know.
Just as a small point, when a Phoenix King is appointed, they take on a regnal name, as in they take on the name to be king. It's the same in the UK, where King Charles might not have been Charles. Not only does Charles have multiple names, and he could have chosen any of them, he could literally choose any name. Much like when you get a new pope, they tend to take a new name to represent what they want to be as pope. And indeed, that's exactly what our next Phoenix King does. He was born Emmerich, but chose a different name.
Yeah, and that's why when you're playing Total War, Prince Emmerich, the reason he is so obnoxiously proud of his name is because he was literally named after this Phoenix King. So
Yep.
we have Prince Emmerich, or more accurately, as he's known once he's Phoenix King Kalidor the First.
Kalidor the Conqueror, more like.
Yeah, Kalidor the Conqueror. So Kalidor the Conqueror got handed a bit of a pickle, which was that the prior Phoenix King dies, Belshazzar. Malekith gets burnt to a piece of charcoal bacon in the flame.
Yep.
And while doing that, he also Marathi and Malekith's little buddies assassinate the vast majority of the people who could have realistically become Phoenix King, who were in the room with them. But there was one notable contender that was not there, which was Prince Emmerich, who is a direct descendant of Kalidor Dragon Tamer. And Emmerich was off kind of being a bit of a country bumpkin, having a fun time hunting out in Thrace. He just didn't show up to the summons because he was too busy enjoying himself. And assassins show up for him, and he gets saved by a couple of white lions, being the native people of Thrace, who deal with a lot of monsters and other big things and have big old axes. And to be frank, they're far more dwarf-pilled than you might expect. They're actually really fun. But they save him, and this literally starts the legacy of the White Lions of Thrace being the bodyguards of the Phoenix King, because they they join up with him and they guide him back, where he basically gets emergency rushed through the process of becoming Phoenix King, and he takes on the name of Kalidor the First and immediately jumps into war against Malekith in the Sundering, which was pretty brutal. His story, he has a really, really good novel as part of the Malekith trilogy, which is weird because the book's not really about Malekith, it's about Kalidor. But he has a rough time. The Sundering is ugly. It is an ugly war. There is no war the elves will have or will ever fight that was as bitter, war crimey, and horrible as the Sundering was. Because no elf knows how to fuck another elf up better than another elf, which is a mouthful you get the point. Like even the War of Vengeance is not nearly as horrific as this war is because of frankly, the magic and the ingenuity of the elves fighting on their own home turf. And it's everybody against everybody. Nobody knows who could be trusted. A lot of people are not necessarily obvious and whose side they take, and every part of elf society fractures because it's not just like, oh, this kingdom, these 5 kingdoms went with Malekith and these 5 kingdoms went with the Phoenix King. No, it was households were being split, so it was ugly, and Kalidor just really, quite literally, got hurled into it. And to his credit, he was a pretty good fighter in and of himself. He even rode a dragon. But he was also pretty grossly overwhelmed. Ultimately, as we all know, he eventually wins the war. But a lot of people don't know that, like, he does eventually have this big epic finale battle against Malekith. He loses. Malekith beats him. And Malekith, unfortunately for him, gets beaten in turn by the Phoenix Guard, who saved the Phoenix King at the last moment. But, like, Kalidor had a rough go of it. And he basically spends his entire reign dealing with Malekith and all of them until the Sundering ends, and the whole incident happens where Malekith and all his lads shoot the spell at the Vortex, and Kalidor Dragon Tamer comes out for a heartbeat to shoot it back. And the Sundering obliterates a good chunk of Ulthuan. When y'all look at Ulthuan nowadays on the map, and we all affectionately refer to it as the donut, it used to be quite a bit bigger. The Outer Kingdoms especially. They used to have a significant surplus of land that is just gone because the tsunamis that came in during the Sundering after that magic rebounded, it basically caused a shockwave that pushed the ocean away from Ulthuan, and then the ocean came back to Ulthuan, and it was bad. And Kalidor spent essentially the rest of his reign trying to very slowly but surely put Ulthuan back together. And he eventually managed to successfully push the Malekith loyalists pretty much all the way out, all the way up to the Blighted Isle, where the really last final brutal battle was. where he actually came face to face with the Widowmaker and stared at it for a really long time before deciding no. He decided to resist the call, and then he tried to pursue the forces of Nagaroth, and that's where he eventually meets his death. Where it's implied that it's magical in nature, that Malekith and his sorcerers summon up a fog on the ocean that isolates Kalidor's ship from the rest of his fleet, and he gets attacked by just an unholy amount of Dark Elf ships. And ultimately, rather than allowing himself to be captured, he throws himself off the ship into the ocean, and he drowns. And that is the end of Kalidor the First.
Yeah, so I have a few things to say about Kalidor, because this is one that Games Workshop, because he is so singularly focused upon war, often refer or use lines along these general directions. Kalidor the First, freaking awesome, except he had a bad death, and that's kind of the angle that they often take when they sum him up. I have a slightly different view. What we've got is a Phoenix King who reigned for really quite a long time. He's got almost 600 years under his belt, as I recall, about 550. So he's going along for quite some time. Oh, Sotek's vanished. Bye, Sotek. You have turned into a white dog, which is really funny.
Hold on, I'm gonna reset. Oh, okay.
Oh, there you go. Hey, blue. Yeah, we've seen in front of the curtain, not behind it. Anyway, let me go through some of my views on him. He is the grandchild of Kalidor, the creator of the Great Vortex. And he is someone who was destined to rule. He is seen by the Dark Elves as the great traitor, because they actually thought that he might go along with him. He did not. He went to war, and he broke the elves. He broke them. Now, you could say, no, Malekith broke them. No, Malekith started it, and he continued it. At this point, there are no Dark Elves. Don't think of it like that. Don't think of them like they're this great other species. There's not. He broke them. Now, you could argue that he had no choice, and the alternative would be to capitulate. And what would capitulation have meant? Falling into the court of Nagaroth once more. The return of Inari the Defender's worst, darkest impulses, perhaps. Maybe Malekith could have been a good king. And this is the big one. We know he would have been. We know he would. We know, because of later, he would have been. But arguably not until he had fucked everything up. But regardless, I am going to lay the sundering not at Malekith's feet. He was the one who did it. I'm going to say that Kalidor was the one that ensured it happened by going to war, and hard war. Now, you could say Malekith was the one who was responsible for all of that, and you're right, he was. But war happens because you have two sides. They chose to go brother against brother. He's as responsible as Malekith for how it turns out. He is as responsible for the slaughter. He's as responsible for the untold number of deaths that are going to occur here. I'm going to take something where I disagree with myself to a degree. When I was going to write this one up, I was going to portray him as one of the greatest elven heroes. That was how I was going to place it, as far as the High Elves were concerned. But the writer that I was going to have for my book when I did it was going to be a Dark Elf as well. And he was going to portray him for exactly how they refer to him. Kalidor the Traitor. That is their name for him. Because he broke the elves. Absolutely did. So, where do I place him? I don't place him. But I'm not going to say where I'm going to place him. I don't place him at S and A, though. I do not think he was a good king. He did not bring peace. He did not do anything but conquer. He freed Ulthuan of half of its population. Do you call that freedom?
So I will add a couple little additional bits for Kalidor the First. Now, to be fair, as the Conqueror, he does set into motion or into place some things that will prove pivotal for what the High Elves use Ulthuan for in the future and allowing Ulthuan to defend itself, which is that he founds the Great Gates. So there are 4 gates that are placed in Ulthuan, the Unicorn Gate, the Griffin Gate, the Dragon Gate, and the Phoenix Gate. And each of these gates are insanely fucking massive constructions. They're bonkers huge that basically close up some mountain passes, and they make it where getting from the outer kingdoms of Ulthuan into the inner kingdoms of Ulthuan is borderline impossible without taking one of these gates. Oh no, there is 5 gates. There's the Lion Gate. That's the one I forgot.
Yeah.
And as getting through these gates is extremely hard, and pretty much the Dark Elves are the only ones that ever manage it. Nobody else ever really does. And even then, the gates, a good number of them have like never fallen. But they make Ulthuan into a quite literal fortress. Like the island is a fortress.
So I think that's also worth taking up, because for all I've been dissing him, I honestly don't have a preference. I just like taking contrary to arguments to what everyone else would expect. He is responsible, if you're looking for legacy, for turning the High Elves into an actual military unit, so to speak. Many of the greatest military excesses that they will have later come later. But successes, pardon me, that is. But he leads the elves to victory. His death is really unfortunate and indeed very predictable. Putting your king on the sea like that in a time of war is always going to be a dangerous outcome, particularly given that the greatest danger they faced was other elves. They knew that. This was almost an inevitability. He made poor decisions as well as good ones. He is ultimately a warrior king. And if you think warrior kings are the best, then he is easily an A tier. Easily. Because he defeats the Dark Elves. He does. Now, he may have lost a fight or two along the way. He may have lost a bunch of battles. Doesn't matter. He won the war. He completely won that war. And he turned Ulthuan from being a kingdom of elves to a kingdom of high elves, where only one half of the Mandela was worshipped from that point onwards. He is as responsible for the fracturing of the elves as Malekith, arguably, but he did it successfully. And that should be perhaps taken into account. However, if you think that there could have been a better way of resolving this, after all, many of the elves were not evil. They weren't dark elves, so to speak. They were just elves, and they could have been brought under treaty. They could have been brought to the table in a variety of ways. He had 600 years to try and resolve this war, and he resolved it with bloodshed and won. Do you think that makes him good or bad? I know where I place him. I don't place him at S.
Yeah, I will include one last note, which is, granted, this may not affect how you feel his rating deserves, but to be fair to Kalidor, this was thrust upon him. He did not aim to be Phoenix King. He was quite literally a last resort. And he was a warrior of Kalidor who did the only thing he knew how to do, which was to be a warrior of Kalidor. But he tried his best. Now, whether or not you think that means he deserves a good or bad rating, we'll find out. But I believe it's time.
So put up a poll, and while that poll's going, I'll wait for the poll to go up so you can start popping in before I give you where I think he goes. Because I love giving counter arguments that aren't necessarily expected. Claiming, for example, that Kalidor I was responsible for the Sundering is, I think, a pretty spicy take.
No, I would say that's a very which Dark Elf is there an assassin in Andy's room? Is there an assassin behind his chair right now?
So is our poll up?
I'm getting them up right now.
Are you getting them up right now? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Just as a small aside, I really like Kalidor. I think he's a great king. I really like him because he stands within almost the pantheon of the elves, directly related to the very beginning of what it stands to be an elf. I'm more than likely old enough to have seen much of what started and kicked everything else off. The whole nature of who he is, I think, is just fun. I'm going to imagine there's going to be a lot of people that take my spicy take the wrong way. I hope that's the case, because I intend to do this with more than one of them. Because there's no point in us just simply laying it down in a way that everyone expects.
Remember, Lorebeards
we
is
got
not
a
about telling you what to think. It's about giving you ammo on what to think. We want
it's
to make your own decision.
Yeah. This is your decision, not ours. Right. So where do I think Kalidor the First sits? I think he wasn't a great Phoenix King. That's not simply because of how the war landed out. He was thrust into a terrible position. But I don't think he was a great king because he didn't end the war at all quickly. And it ruined Ulthuan, completely ruined it. Utterly and completely ruined it. Yeah, well, there you go. I love it. A different king would have won this day. A different king would not necessarily be able to take Malekith down or whatever, but the whole process that falls out here, he has responsibility for. He's not responsible for it, but he is part of the problem. And his warlike route perhaps was a good way of providing the initial defense, but after 600 years, no peace was ever found. This is bad. It's just bad. It's not a great way to conduct rule. So I think that if it comes to how effective he was at what he does, really good, right up at A for me. But in terms of what he did for the elves as a whole, truly awful. And for me, it balances out, not on the negatives too heavily, because he did win that war, and he was exceptionally good at what he did. So for me, he's a relatively clear B.
Yeah, Mr. Pig saying there's an easy way to say Malekith wasn't king. He was burned and therefore rejected by Asuryan for all they could tell. I mean, there is the very strong notes of interpretation, in-universe interpretations and propaganda about what was going on and what happened, which is definitely worth considering. Yeah, I love derailing Elgi talk with proper dwarfs, but please give me a proper dwarf pep talk for this boss. Honestly, you just have dwarves grumbling in the corner about, of course, Elgi would have a civil war to such a ridiculous extent.
Yeah, I think this is a particularly pertinent quote, and I think I sort of agree with it. He wasn't responsible for the Sundering. He absolutely wasn't, but he was responsible for how the High Elves handled it. But you could argue that Dark Elves were pushing, and what else could he do? And the question is, what else could he have done? Because often they were fighting against their friends. And this is really dialed up hard in the books at the time. They're fighting against their brothers and their sisters, and they don't want to. They just don't want to, but they're doing it anyway. So I'm quite happy to have a relatively spicy take with Kalidor the First, because I'm aware, particularly during my time when I was writing bits, that many people love him.
Yeah, I actually had to do math on this one real quick.
Oh, exciting! Where's it going to land?
Because I'm not giving Twitch like easy bonus points with percentages. I'm just adding actual numbers. Just hold on. YouTube takes a second to come on. YouTube, hurry up.
We're also about to get to the best Phoenix King ever.
Oh yeah, everybody's favorite. Well, I mean, he is some people's favorite for different reasons.
Who brings up, but they were all deceived, for there was another Phoenix King, one forged in the abyssal death, scaled and gilled. What? Wait a minute. Wait, what? What? How did it turn out fishman by a foot? And then seriously? I had to pause there for a second.
Fishman in from the top rope. Okay, hold on. So that times this number is 30. Okay, interesting. Wow, okay, so this was actually really close. So overall, with about 130-ish people voting, he is B tier, but A tier was right on his heels. A tier was only behind by probably about 10 to 15 votes, but only about 20 votes behind that was C tier.
Oh, wow. Okay, so then it's like right in the middle. Clearly B then.
But there was also a pretty solid there was a good 15, 16 people who felt he was S tier.
Oh, there you go. So I'm going to put a brief pause here and go, so look where we are. Belshazzar, S. Anarion, A. Kalidor the First, B. And when we're bringing in our next Phoenix Kings, they need to start measuring up to where you've already placed them. So if the next Phoenix King you think is worse than Kalidor the First, then you only really have C and D left. If you think he's better than Kalidor the First, but is he better than Anarion, is your next question. And if the answer is he's not better than Anarion, than probably B.
Yeah,
we have
standards
we're beginning to
established
build an
now.
actual set of ranks now. So do have a little think about that as we head on into the best Phoenix King, whatever did walk Ulthuan.
Yeah, so now we have the Phoenix King who, thanks to our doughty allies, the dwarves, has the longest list of titles, something he should be very proud for.
Mhm.
Kalidor II, also known as Kalidor the Warrior. So an interesting thing happened in Ulthuan, which is that the elves went through a bit of a panic of that after Anarion died, the elves went, you know what? We don't want this to be a dynasty. We don't want this to be a legacy. We want a king that is not a fighter. We want peacetime. So let's go with Belshazzar, not Malekith. Well, after the Sundering, the High Elves were so psychologically shook, to put it simply, that they went, holy shit, Kalidor the First is dead. Malekith is still out there. We need Kalidor back. We need more Kalidor. Please God, more Kalidor. So they went with Kalidor's son, as opposed to necessarily, the best person for the job merits-wise. Kalidor II was an interesting individual. Calling him Kalidor the Warrior is fair. He was an extremely gifted fighter. He knew how to fight. However, he was the most, there's a lot of talk about how like the Kalidorian elves are very pompous and arrogant to the point that like the Dragon Princes won't even dip their banners or like do anything for the Phoenix King. They just stand there because they're like, oh, we'll acknowledge him as an equal because they're that obnoxious. Kalidor II was deeply, deeply arrogant. He knew his daddy was Phoenix King, and he grew up essentially as royalty. And he kind of reveled in it. If you actually read the Kalidor book, that's part of the, once again, weirdly, the Malekith trilogy, you actually get some scenes of Kalidor II as a child. And Kalidor II, or Kalidor the First, was genuinely worried about his son. Because, interestingly, so this is a really fascinating fact about Kalidor II. Despite being Kalidor's son, and a descendant of Kalidor Dragondamer, and a great prince of Kalidor, he did not have a dragon. He could not form a bond with a dragon. And his father found that deeply troubling. But his father didn't really have time to do anything about it before he ends up meeting his death. And Kalidor II basically came out and said, all right, the Dark Elves ran away to some other continent. I don't really see them. We'll send some scouts to maybe check it out. But, war's over. We won. Malekith's probably dead. We're not going to worry about it. Let's turn our attention to rebuilding Ulthuan. Let's make Ulthuan great again. And he really got going on that bandwagon. Big time. And to his credit, I will say, Ulthuan did rebuild quite successfully during his reign of about 600 years. He reigned longer than his father did, not by much, but by a little bit. Mm-hmm. But as probably most of you know where this is going, there was a notable bump in his reign, which is that some dwarf ambassadors showed up, and with some pretty compelling evidence from dwarf standards and human standards, I would say, we're like, hey, some elves attacked our trade caravans. Our High King has sent us here to demand reparations, but we don't want like a war. We don't want like a bad incident, but you owe us oath gold or weregild essentially, and like you need to pay reparations for what happened to the clans that lost loved ones and things that were stolen, etc. And Kalidor went, how about these mud people that have dragged their dirt into my throne room? Let's shave them. That'd be fun. Let's clean them up because those beards are ugly. And they held down the ambassadors, and Kalidor, I think himself, shaved them. Not very nicely. And then they chucked them all on a boat and sent them home. And this immediately erupted into the War of Vengeance, which was bad. bad war. It quite literally brought about the end of the Golden Age for the dwarfs. and also deeply, deeply weakened the old world's defenses against chaos. Though it also opened the door for humanity, so there is that. Kalador. To play devil's advocate, Prince Snorri attacked Kor Vaneth before the High King had a chance to find out why the High Elves were attacking them. The Elven messengers did get to Ulthuan first, so both sides had stuff to shout about when the argument broke up. That is true. That is very fair. There were quite a few dwarves who were eager for a war against the elves. That is undeniably true. And actually, if you want to read an excellent trilogy, go read the War of Vengeance trilogy. It's a really fun trilogy of books. There's demon shenanigans. There's all sorts of duplicitous things going on. But ultimately, Kalador's handling of the incident was pretty rough. And he didn't really care about the war against the dwarves because he figured the colonies could handle it because he did not consider the dwarves to be a realistic threat. And to put it bluntly, the colonies put up a good fight, but it was not going well for them because dwarf Kodaks are very difficult to sack. And in the end, Kalador ends up killing High King Gotrek Starbreaker's son, which actually gets the High King to get personally involved because he was staying out of it because he really didn't want this war. And finally, it builds up to the 14th siege of Torlesi, where Prince Kalador II finally goes Phoenix King Kalador II finally goes toe-to-toe with Gotrek Starbreaker, and he is killed. And Gotrek Starbreaker kills him, takes the Phoenix Crown, and says, all right, war's over. Everyone go home and shut up. And they all turn around, and the High Elves kind of waver, but then they get message that because Kalador II brought most of the army with him when he leads his army to the old world, Malekith was waiting. And the second Kalador II slipped out of the port and was heading for the old world, he basically attacked. So Ulthuan was left woefully unprepared. And the High Elves get word that, hey, Ulthuan is having a really bad time. And they had to immediately turn around and run home. And so the war comes to an end with the dwarfs as the quote-unquote victors for all of the maybe century they got to enjoy that before their volcanoes blow up.
Hey, Dynaman, you're not wrong there.
Yeah,
that said, he's written as comically inept, but then I look at some real-life leaders, past and present. You are not wrong. Right, so I do have a couple of opinions on this one, and this one's harder to play Daemon's advocate with because it's fair to say that Kalador II's only redeeming quality was that he could kick ass and chew gum. At the same time, he was an extraordinary fighter, but even that wasn't good enough because eventually he gets felled in combat. So the only great redeeming quality that he had was brought to an end by the dwarves who took his crown and indeed took the crown of the elves forever. So let's have a quick rundown of what I think of Kalador II before we go for what I feel is almost inevitable ranking here. And that is, he did reign for 600 years, but in his 600 years, the Elven Empire is shattered because the War of the Beard wipes out so many elves out there. And the amount of damage it does to elven military might is more than significant enough that when it comes to the next Phoenix King, everything had to change. And if it wasn't for good old Kalador II doing what he did, we probably wouldn't have what eventually becomes the Wood Elves. He's a bit of a mess. He didn't make good decisions. And it's fair to have the comment like, oh, he's almost comically inept. No, I don't think he is comically inept. I think he's horrifically inept. I think that he made many very foolish, high elven decisions. And the reason his reign was so long was because there was no way to get rid of him because he was an elf. Indeed, it is because of his rule that elves completely push aside the idea of hereditary rulership in a variety of different positions. He is responsible for this because they were so appalled at what happened through the course of his rule. I do not rate this king. I think it's fair to say as Sotek slowly but surely builds the poll in the background, everybody's going to guess where I'm going to go. And I think Sotek's likely to go into the same place too, without me really putting any words in his mouth at all.
Pulls up.
You can obviously come up with perhaps a different argument, and I would love to hear one, but I cannot think of any strong redeeming qualities that he has. He was, put bluntly, a prick. He was utterly horrendous and arrogant. He thought he was better than everybody else. He took humor in other people's pain. He was so good in close combat, he used that to lord it over others. He just was not the best of Phoenix Kings.
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that really cinches it is a lot of people are calling for a new tier to be created. Is this dragonless behavior? Here's the thing. The dragons, no dragon bonded with him because of who he is as a person. Yeah. He did not have the patience or the humility to properly learn the dragon song and how to communicate with the dragons and how to build a relationship with them, which for an elf of Kalador is supposed to be something that's borderline like natural to them. Like he is, in many ways, I would say he is the opposite of everything Kalador Dragon Tamer was. He's almost his polar opposite, and that is not a compliment.
Many
ways. And he's just a best. Like he represents, especially to not to get. I'll just leave it at a very simple comment. But like the comment said earlier, he is an excellent reminder of the worst thing we are seeing in our world's politics now in the Warhammer universe. For the elves.
Yeah, he's also the problem that you have when you have kings who are effectively all powerful and who cannot be brought to task if they make mistakes.
It's interesting. He was a cult of personality. Like he lorded from his father's fame. And like Andy said, he was a really, really great fighter. Like he was, but ultimately, despite that, it was a fight that ultimately brings the end of his reign, so he wasn't as good as he needed to be. Even at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed. How's that vote going?
The vote is going good, though I'm getting really, really excited for the next Phoenix King because he opens up some really hilarious cans of worms.
I do love the next one. This is one of my faves, actually. The next one was one of the ones I was looking forward to writing most, I'll be honest. And I was very sad when I ended up not writing that book.
Yep. But, yeah, so, yeah, we go call the poll there. So, I'll give, a slight shout out to the one person on Twitch that thought he was S tier. The one person.
You're a brave man.
Probably a dwarf. But or a Zinch. But we have D tier overwhelmingly. With quite a few people in chat protesting that there is not an F tier.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. He was a bad Phoenix King. He wasn't a good one. And I'm sure there were points where there were many in his court who thought he was good for one reason or another. But yeah, no. Just no.
Yep. So with that, Kalador the Warrior.
There he goes.
Right on down into D tier. All right. So from there, we go on to a Phoenix King that is a lot more important than you may realize if you haven't heard of him. So we have Caradriel, the Peacemaker. Caradriel is actually a really, really interesting Phoenix King if you ever read about the Black Library series, especially the War of Vengeance, because you actually get Caradriel as a character throughout the story, but he doesn't obviously become Phoenix King to the very end of the story. He is much more of a diplomat, almost I wouldn't say a spy, but he has a very very political individual. And the things that's really interesting about him is that when he becomes Phoenix King, he does something that shocked a lot of the High Elves, because many of the High Elves were very angry about the High King Godric Starbreaker taking the Phoenix Crown, the very Phoenix Crown that Anarion the Defender wore. They were like, oh shit, we need to get that back. We need to get all our dragons. We need to go do all this stuff. But Caradriel caught on to what Malekith was up to actually quite quickly, and pretty much immediately turned around and said, it's just a crown. Like, it's just a thing. We'll make a new one. We have to go home. We got to get out of here. And there was some grumbling about it, but that's what he did. He turned everybody home, and they let. And he also sent out the call. Now, this was actually quite controversial, of that he sent out the call for the colonies to be abandoned. For all the elves to pick up, like, no matter, which, keep in mind, the colonial elves had lived there for thousands of years. At least hundreds, but many of them for longer. They had fought hard to build this new frontier, to build these new homes, many of which, of course, had been destroyed by the dwarfs, but quite a decent number were still standing. And this was their homes. They had lived here their whole life. They had their memories and all this stuff here. And all of a sudden, the king comes and says, pack it up. We need you home. We need every hand on deck. Everybody has to come home. This, of course, leads to what we will later see with the Lar Lorn and Ethel Loren, where some of the colonies say, nope, fuck you. You're not our king. We're out of here. And they peace out. And Caradriel says, you know what? We don't have time to deal with that. Fine, bye. And just goes home to deal with Malekith. And they have another war, the Second Great War against Malekith. This one was actually kind of interesting.
I have opinions coming in.
Yeah, because this war doesn't get a ton of details. But one thing that's really good about Caradriel that's interesting is that most Phoenix Kings were great generals or great warriors. Some mix. Caradriel recognized that he was neither of these. And he immediately turns around and goes, who are our best generals? Like, who here has the most experience in fighting? And a couple of elves raise their hands, most notably one named Tethless, who we'll talk about later. And he goes, you. Y'all are my generals. Go. And he delegates, which may sound like I'm like making fun of him, but no, like he was honest and smart enough to go, I am not the man for this job. You guys go get shit done. And to his credit, it works spectacularly. The high elves, the dark elves are not completely pushed off of Ulthuan. There are some areas where they manage to, like, they rebuild, so to speak, the fortress of Anlek, though it's the first time it's been built since Anarian's time. And the dark elves actually set up shop there. But Caradriel, the reason he's very much called the Peacemaker is he was not, like Calidor, the first, he was not hell-bent on chasing the dark elves off Ulthuan. He said, we need to do what we can to make our people safe. We need to do what we can to get Ulthuan to where it, like, we have reliable defenses against them, but we do not need to bleed ourselves dry to get them off of the island, which is a very interesting perspective for a Phoenix King. It separates him from a lot of his fellows.
Yeah. So I got some opinions, but before I start sharing my opinions, because I'm quite enjoying just having crazy opinions, let's bring up some comments. Hey, Dynaman. Okay, it's time to advocate for my fave. I've got a feeling you kind of like Caradriel. Not flawless, but I think Caradriel's main strength is that he recognizes that he is not the best at everything. And hey, you're basically saying he recognizes he's not an elf. He is not a fantastic general, so he puts good generals in charge when needed. He's a project manager and tries to just get things done and organized and pull everyone together when needed. He doesn't manage, I presume, to repel the Dark Elf invasion, which is a flaw, though. Personal view, A tier. Interesting. Tyrant drops in and said, they're all S tier except for the current one because the only good Elgay is a dead Elgay. And quite right, too. Inquisitor Thomas, he is responsible for Britonia, super F tier. And I do believe I've got another one from Dynaman. Yeah, there we go. Though, a question on when he calls the elves home, is it just the old world colonies or is it all of them? If it's all of them, then do the others get recolonized or did they refuse? And then comes Dylan with first time live. Yay! Great to see you, by the way. Been watching for years from Louisiana. Question, since we have the Phoenix Kings, does resurrection magic exist? And the answer to that is, in general, look at necromancy. Right, so
there's a couple that slipped through earlier. Just a couple that slipped through earlier. Calidor II needs his own SK tier like Carl or Crimlo. Carl is Need More Calidor, the Assure version of Need More Cowbell. It was during that particular period of time. And Still End here is saying, I see a pattern here. Elves have some real thug leadership style. Only those who kick ass really lead. Well, not
there
not
is a
now.
bit of that because they, and I'm not going to say this because it's because all elves are kick ass. Even the ones who are shit warriors are better than almost everyone else because they're fucking elves and they're full of elf bullshit. Anyway, I have an opinion. I think he's crap. And I know this is a spicy take, which is why I'm going to give it. So Caradriel had 600 years. And what did he do in his 600 years? He broke the Elven Empire. He said, all elves come home, all of them. And they didn't. He is responsible for losing Athaloran. He is responsible for losing the Lorelorn. He is responsible for losing all of the other colonies, the ones that we don't talk about because Games Workshop never bothered writing that part of the world. He is the one who is responsible for ending the Elven Empire. And he did it for a war that he didn't even try to win. He sent generals to organize it to the north and kept on holding them back, not giving them everything that they needed to finally finish off and push the Dark Elves out. I'm going to say that, broadly speaking, his peacemaker name is an absolute lie. He didn't bring peace. He is a warrior king in terms of what he did. He's a king of war. His entire rule is a war, and he was shit at it. And he wasn't just shit at it because he didn't know how to do it. He got good people around him, but they were telling him to do stuff, and he did not finish that war because he was a peacemaker and he thought he could do it a bit better. He is not a good king. Now, he was in his youth supposedly a great diplomat, supposedly very good at what he did. None of this shows. If he was a great diplomat, Athaloran would still be on side. If he was a great diplomat, the Lorelorn would have stayed on side. It did not. He lost them all completely and utterly because he didn't know how to make a hard decision well. The hard decision was to call them back. The bad decision was to say, and if you don't come back, you're out, which is what he did. He screwed the pooch. He completely ruined what was elf almost dominance of the world. He brought it all together and went, you know what? Yeah, nah. Now, I'm not saying he was bad per se. I'm not saying he's the worst. He was shit, but I'm not saying as bad as Calidor II, who is actually the worst. But I am saying that contrary to the general opinion, where this is a king that is generally given this, almost this halo of, you know what, he was all right. There is nothing in his rule where you can say that turned out well. The best that people can generally say is, well, you know, he got good people around him and he listened to them. Holy shit, that's the basic requirement for a king. Nobody's perfect. Anyone who's in leadership should get the best people around them so that they can make good decisions. The bad kings do it. The good kings do it. The fact that that's what they focus on shows just how bad he was, because it's the only thing they've got to say that's good about him. There's literally nothing else. I don't think he's necessarily D tier, though. And I am actually veering towards D. I don't think he's necessarily there, but I'm not going to give where I think he is until we've got our poll up.
So I'll offer a couple of counter thoughts of that. A couple of notable good things that he did. Caradriel did actually make the gates of Ulthuan functional, and this he doesn't actually end up implementing this policy. It's a later Phoenix scheme that does, but what he does here leads to it, which is that he introduced the system of rotating levies. So that soldiers would have rotating garrisons into the gate so that the ones that were defending it would not just be stuck there forever, getting like perma PTSD and also, you know, dwindling, that they would rotate in and out, which actually, if you know, if you've watched a lot of Andy stuff on Elven psychology, is really important that he did that for the sake of those elves guarding the gates. And while everything Andy said is true, I'm not going to deny that. Everything he said is technically true. I would argue that you could also very much look at it from an angle of that Caradriel was in a very desperate situation, and he just trimmed as much fat as he possibly could to focus on a singular objective, which was making Ulthuan not go into just what Calidor I took it into.
Yeah, he turned it into an isolationist nation that didn't look outwards anymore.
I don't think he could have afforded to let it do that, though. Otherwise, Ulthuan would have fallen.
But elves were left.
Well, yeah, but a lot came home.
Yeah, but they could have got them without losing everyone. He lost them.
I don't know. I think that he did.
Devil's advocate.
If your goal, granted, this is purely from the perspective of if you think Ulthuan matters more than everything outside of Ulthuan, I think he made objectively the right choice. But that's only if you view it in that way, which is a huge debatable point. Because he could have focused on the Elven Kingdom as a world, because undeniably he brings about the end of the world-spanning empire of the elves, in the sense that he frees it, as opposed to Calor II, who kind of kicked it off.
Yeah. And I would add to that, because I broadly agree. But, if I'm taking off my Daemon's Advocate hat, where I'm attempting to, because I know that he's a relatively popular one, so there was no way I was going to go down the popular route. Because if we're not going to go a bit spicy, why are we even doing this? If his ultimate goal was to defend Ulthuan, he failed, because he doesn't defend Ulthuan by the end of his rule. If his ultimate goal is to defend the elven people, he failed, because he breaks the elves into yet another group. The Wood Elves exist because of his failures. They should be part of the High Elves group, and they are not. He pretty much forces this to occur. Then don't think that the Wood Elves of this time are these alien weirdo creatures that can never work with the rest. They are no different to the Elves of Avalorn in the Inner Kingdom. They are just elves that live in woods, and they most certainly are not that much weirder than what's going on with the Everqueen. I broadly will lay out, because I don't think the vote is up yet, so I don't want to actually think he is, because I am very much going for trying to not just support the general view. I broadly suggest that his rule is an absolute lie. And by that I mean he didn't bring peace.
Pulls up.
Excellent. He didn't bring peace. He was responsible for effectively leaving Ulthuan in a state of eternal war. What he did do, though, is he brought the levy, and that is a long-lasting change for the elves. It makes the elves of Ulthuan a far more capable of defending itself group. That is something he did, but again, it's a lie to his name. He's not a peacemaker. What he did was he taught the elves how to fight and continue to fight and to not finish the fucking job. So my general opinion, since we're now moving off, is that he's not D tier. I don't think it's that strong, because he did do some good. He taught the elves how to fight and fight and fight. He, of all the Phoenix Kings, is the one who feels most like a dark elf plant. In that he did nothing to end that war, and his generals, in many respects, ended up doing stuff not necessarily with him supporting what they were doing, because he was a peacemaker, man. The Elven Empire is ruined. The Wood Elves are lost in their entirety. They're left with like one or two tiny outposts, which will get colonized again probably at a later date.
This is the final major fracturing of the elves.
It is, and he made this happen. This isn't something that was caused by war or something. He chose to do this, and because of that, I can't put him above C. I just personally can't. But if I were taking the general view, he was almost certainly a probable A. But for me, he's a C.
Gary Reynolds, at the end of the day, they're all Z tier. Elves never make an Apache helicopter or a fighter jet. I'm sorry, have you not seen the Lothern Skycutter? I'm going to need you to rescind that statement.
Yeah, totally.
If Calor I gets credit for having the role shoved upon him, so should Cara Dryal. That's a fair point. If that's something that you're taking into account when you're deciding where you think he should go.
Absolutely. But it's how do you resolve it? He didn't.
And there's an interesting thing of that. His ability to delegate, I do think, has some good strengths to it, but it also comes with some strong weaknesses as well.
It's not just the basic job. That's a little bit like saying, I went into a shop and the shopkeeper sold me things, and his ability to sell was really useful. I don't know, be able to do that.
When I look at like Calor the First and Second, I feel like both of them suffered because they did not delegate as well as they needed to.
Or is it they just didn't delegate the fighting parts? They delegated the politics at home. They delegated what was happening elsewhere. It's the parts that they don't talk about. It's all about balance.
Grim Kelto, all these things, but do any of them speak? But do any of them speak for their people as I? You all called me bum. I'm top bum now. I'm Phoenix King. So F you, Searing Doom. Top bum. Yeah, you are top bum. Thank
Searing
you.
Doom. Boom.
Damn, Andy, you've substantially lowered my view of my favorite. Curse you for having such good points and now feel sad. Keep in mind, Andy is trying to like make y'all put on your thinking caps. Don't necessarily let him sway you. He's not trying to tell you. He's trying to educate you.
I'm after all salesman as well. But yes, I'm attempting to look at them all with a slightly different lens, because most of the Phoenix Kings are generally presented with the almost top view of the army list, where they go, and this king went to war here and here and here, and if they're not good at war, they're a bit rubbish. Or alternatively, this king was peaceful, and that's great. And they often don't really go down into the depths of what they do. And I'm trying to strip away the language that they use to make one king look good or bad and just look at their deeds. Look at what happened. And in this particular case, his name is a misnomer. He's not a peacemaker. Yeah, he's a war king. And it's a fun one. Yeah. I like it.
I will note, to Caradriel's misfortune, because he's a Games Workshop character, because he's not a big fighter, he also gets way less of a focus than he probably should.
Straight he does. I did find it quite interesting, because obviously when I was doing all the research for putting him in place way back when, you're spot on. There was so little there. And what was there was particularly interesting, because it sort of contradicted how they were characterizing him. And I found that fascinating. So that was one of the reasons why, for this version at least, I painted him in a relatively bleak way, largely because Games Workshop generally takes almost the opposite side, because it's an easy thing to do.
Okay, hold on. I have to do some quick. This one's
actually. Now, we have some comments. Tyrant says, "Thank God you guys are doing this. I think I fear what is about to come. I couldn't have gone 164.5 hours without hearing you talk about elves. And you know what? We're almost certainly going to be doing that again this Sunday when we talk about the Colour Denied. So this Sunday is the Colour Denied, and we are going to be delving yet again into the elves for probably the last time in a wee while. So if you like getting your elf fix or your chaos fix, this weekend will be fun for you.
Okay, this one.
Moving down. I'm going to, before we'll get the last comments. Oh, I just did that one.
We have to do a tiebreaker vote, so I'm going to get that up.
Oh, and he had those elves that stayed already changed, and he let them go and didn't resist the inevitable and start another sundering. That's only one part of it, and I actually strongly disagree, because there's lots of connections between the Wood Elves and the rest, and they're not, at this point, that much different to the elves that are sitting in Avalorn. But the change, although it had obviously, yes, begun, had not completely sunk in yet. I'm not sure I would necessarily, Silver Skink, say that this was, at this point in their history, an inevitable end. Tyrant!
Pulls up. It's a very quick vote. I'm giving y'all 1 minute. It's a tiebreaker vote.
Oh, have you got a tiebreaker? Was it that close? I'm not a player. I don't want to think. You know what? That's fair. And I apologize for doing that. Hey, Ricky Champions. Late in the stream. Got hold of some Dragon Ogres. Nice. Was going to paint them. But saw you were live and hopped on to see where an hour late. Yes, you were. Also, Finubar is the best Phoenix King. We will be getting to him soon. I quite like Finubar.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that's kind of really interesting. Oops, I didn't put up the YouTube poll. Whoop, there you go. Sorry, YouTube. It's up now. It's up. My bad. I thought I hit start and I didn't. So 1 minute. One of the things that's really interesting about Caradriel, and I think this influences a lot of people's views, which I think is worth, I'd actually like to hear Andy expand on this for a moment, because I think it'd be interesting to hear about, is that some Black Library books very much paint the Wood Elves and the Wood Elf army books beautifully, in the sense that when the Elven colonies leave, they can literally feel Athel Loren calling them. Like, the pact that Durthu made with the Everqueen is enacted, and it's like a compulsion they almost can't resist. And I could see some people looking at that and saying, oh, well, Caradriel obviously had no power in this situation because it was inevitable. Like, this was almost a destiny type situation.
Everqueen. Not Wood Elves. Everqueen.
True.
True. It's Everqueen. It's with the elves as a whole. It's not with just the Wood Elves. He abandoned them. Cat amongst pigeons. I'm stirring up the pot.
Okay, that's long enough. Oh my god, it's still so close. So I just gotta do some quick math here. 9 and 8. So this I'm trying to make sure this is as fair as possible. So see, it's 90. 94. That is that plus 8 is okay. So keep in your mind 62. Keep the number 62 in your mind real quick.
62.
Okay. So C tier wins with 62 votes, and B tier was on its butt at 54 votes.
Oh, so close.
So the community has spoken. That
the community has indeed spoken.
Is our very first C tier Phoenix King.
Okay, so now looking at that, and I think it's obviously that as it currently stands, I sort of suggested that this is not a bad run. Let's see if I still agree with it when I see it. Belshazzar at the top, the founder of the Elven Empire, effectively seems fair. Anarion the Defender, flawed but awesome. Calador the First, the Conqueror, seems fair. Caradriel did his best, but holy shit balls, wasn't great in my opinion. And then Calador the Second right at the bottom. Oh, that's super fun. That's going to be really interesting to see where the rest are going to end up slotting beside everyone else.
Yeah, because now we get to say stuff of, well, they're not better or worse than so-and-so. All right, so now we get into, from an in-universe perspective, probably the most controversial Phoenix King.
We didn't even cover what happens when he died peacefully in bed.
No, we actually have to talk about that real quick.
We should say something about that because it really should be said.
This is really important. Completely forgot about it because we were too busy talking about his policies, which, fair. So Caradriel opens a huge can of worms in the lore because he canonically dies peacefully in bed, which opens up. So he dies of old age, functionally, which opens up a huge can of worms when everyone in their right mind reads that and goes, wait. So elves can die of old age. And if you're also an End Times reader, when they had that whole thing of like, oh, Asuryan drives all the Phoenix Kings to madness and horror, which is why they all die horribly, you look over at Caradriel, who died peacefully asleep.
Totally. It was such a bad take in the End Times.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, Andy, would you enlighten the audience about why this is such a weird thing to have happen? And to be fair, he's the only elf. Well, I'll let Andy do it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's really weird, because we don't necessarily know when he was born. But, and this is a pretty big but, elves in the lore changed over time. To begin with, elves were creatures that lived up to about 500, 1,000 years or so, and that's what they were. And then some writers looked at it and went, but take a look at what happened with, oh wow, Belshazzar, he lived for 1,600. Oh, they can all do that, can't they, sort of, maybe? And they ignored the whole thing with the dark elves and getting old and bathing in blood to keep their beauty and all the rest of it. And slowly but surely over the course of time, elves just sort of stopped getting old, ever. And they stopped showing any signs of it, except for the occasional roleplay reference where it would say, he looks sort of middle-aged for an elf, and very little beyond that.
Whatever that means.
What does that even mean? Exactly. And then we get our most recent lore where things like this become commonplace. The old elf goes to sleep and wakes up 200 years later. Nobody's even sure if the old ones are dead. They're just floating in castles somewhere in Althuan. And they just stop dying. Indeed, they stop needing to eat. Elves became weird. Really, 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 really magic and weird. And the whole concept of how they've been established in the Dark Elf side stopped making any sense. Why would they need to bathe in blood for their beauty? A bunch of elves started popping up that were several thousand years old, and no one really knew how long they'd been around for. Now, some of those they covered up. For example, Daith, as we discussed in the other stream the other day, suddenly became a god. That answered that. He wasn't originally. He was just an elf. And then we look at some other ones where you're like, how old are they? They're like 3,000, 4,000 years. Why are they not dying of old age? Because anything over 1,000 years old should surely be getting proper old, because that's what happens with the dark elves. But no. It's weird because we have no real lore in the modern lore of what properly happens when elves age. But we have a Phoenix King who just dies in bed. So our obvious conclusions are either A, he gave up and he just went, I'm done now. look, I haven't finished this war. I haven't done anything else. And he just stops. And if that's the case, fucking D tier. Get him the hell out of here. I mean, seriously, out. Or alternatively, he sort of, just died of old age for random reasons.
Poison. Yeah.
Or something else. And so it's really funny. We know what happens when elves die because it's described in all of them, but we don't know what happens when they grow old. And the lore is so massively, deeply contradictory on this that this single Phoenix King is a lovely holdout from a previous version of what the lore offered, because it was written right into the 4th edition of Warhammer. Back then, elves only normally lasted about 1,000 years, except for the weird ones that lasted longer. Morathi, who was still beautiful some 7,000 years later, was that way because of sorcery and blood and all the rest of the horrors that she did, where others would have died. Malekith continued on using Morathi's magic. They unnaturally extended their life. That stopped being the case. They're just elves. And it's crazy.
Yeah, it's just a really funny thing. Like, we're not gonna go anywhere super important with it. It's just funny and worth pointing out. Where, like Andy said, if you read the Dark Elf book, it's like, oh yeah, hags have to deal with the worries of getting old and looking like old crones. And you go, what? And then you look over at the High Elf book, and it's like the
2,000 years later.
Yeah, Matt Ward points out a hilarious thing. I think it's in the Fate of the Body segment where he's like, oh yeah, there are some elves that go to sleep and nobody knows if they're alive or dead. And so their families are like still visiting them, but they've actually been dead, but nobody can tell. And you're like, what? It's just weird. The whole thing.
And then even worse, then they get up like 200 years later because they weren't actually dead and they were just subsisting off the local winds of magic because elves are so magical. Yeah, we've got ourselves some interesting parts, but it seems relatively clear. Caradriel dies of the elven equivalent of old age. And that elven equivalent might just be his soul had reached the point where he no longer wished to be on the material plane and he moved on. And if that is the case, I give a strong bullshit. He deserves to be definitely down on the lower end.
Yeah, depending on how you feel about him, he either pulled a Padme where he lost the will to live, or he pulled a Master Oogway where he goes, my time has come.
My time has come. Yeah, I do love the massive, deep inconsistency with elves in the lore, and it was something that I'll admit I was quite looking forward to rationalizing with an elf book. I'll be super interested to see what other people do with it.
Yeah. So next,
we have that comment because it does indeed make me laugh. It's the high-stress rookie lifestyle. It just brings you to an end far faster. They burn out. They don't fade away.
Maybe
the high elves fade away.
If you go back to our Kane stream and the whole thing about like Kane changes, and maybe Kane just really likes MILFs. Just really likes older women.
Yeah.
All right. So Tethys the Slayer. Now Tethys the Slayer has one of the shortest reigns. Not nearly as short as Anarian's, but it's just about 300 years, almost on the just a little over 300 years, barely. Tethys was a violent man. He was a hell of a general. He was a hell of a fighter, but he was spooky. That Tethys is described as the most hate-filled elf that ever took the Phoenix throne, which says a lot considering that he did have an Aryan before him, but Tethys he despised the Dark Elves.
Yeah.
Deeply hated them. And he was the thing that he wanted to do more than anything was to completely kick the Dark Elves off of Ulthuan, and then if he could, invade Nagaroth and wipe them out to a man, woman, and child. Like, he was brute. Like, this was not, to put it very clear, Tethys was not, I want to cleanse Ulthuan. It was, I want to genocide the Nagaroth elves.
Yep.
He was super well driven for that. What's interesting is it's not actually that well necessarily explored about why he hated them as much as. Oh no, actually no, it does.
His family.
His family was killed. So yeah, he had a personal vendetta. Now, some interesting things about him is that Tethys had to pretty heavily revolutionize the elves, because what happens during Tethys's reign is that a lot of the dragons stop waking up. Many of the dragons become more tired, and they go into deeper slumbers where the elves can no longer wake them up. And this leads to him revolutionizing the Ulthuani armies to deal with this lack of what used to be kind of their nuclear bomb equivalent. Their ace in the hole. So the big thing that he does is that he introduces everyone has to know how to fight. Everyone needs to be trained in spear, bow, and is it sword? I think. But like every single elf has to know how to fight. And citizen militias become the standard. Where when you're looking at a high elf army, you may not realize it, but like the general like spearmen, archers, and all those guys, they're basically just militias, despite the fact that they're genuinely very elite soldiers. They're common citizens. They're not professional soldiers. And it's because Tethys looked at Ulthuan and basically said, okay, if we don't have dragons, then every single person who can pick up a weapon must pick up a weapon so that they can A, defend their homes, and B, when I am going to go out and genocide all these elves, I have enough troops.
Yep. So I have, there's not a great deal written about Tethys the Slayer. So you can sum up Tethys relatively swiftly. Tethys was a bloodthirsty Phoenix King. Tethys was angry, bitter, and suffered deeply from trauma because of what had happened to his family. He was arguably a terrible choice of Phoenix King in that they all knew this, but they chose him for a reason, because there were still Dark Elves on Ulthuan. The previous Phoenix King had failed to get rid of them, and Tethys was seen as the king who could do it, because if he was unleashed, if he no longer had the tether of the previous Phoenix King in place, then possibly, finally, we could be done with them, and Ulthuan could be returned to our hands. Tethys then sets to doing exactly that. But it's interesting having those little bits about saying how the dragons are now getting sleepy, the magic in the world has faded because the vortex is going. There's all sorts of oddities going on during the course of his rule. But I do think that the citizen militia is the next logical step for what's going to happen with the High Elves, given what the previous Phoenix Kings had put in place, particularly with the ideas of rotating troops out that had come with the previous gates, the idea that there no longer was enough elves to do that. So training all elves to be potentially capable at war was a core component of Tethys's rule. And I think that this cannot be understated as for his influence on later generations, because this law is maintained to the end. All elves should be able to fight, and they all can. Now, it's fair to say that, as we all know, elves are full of elven bullshit, and they're surprisingly capable of doing everything. Screw those guys. But Tethys took advantage of it and turned them into a better military force. But that's not to say that the elves didn't have a greater military force in the past. They did. It's just you were elves. Oh, yes.
Emil in chat pointed out that they're correct. They do this so many times in this book. So the official citizen levy is not until 2 Phoenix Kings later. No, 3 Phoenix Kings later.
Okay, thank you very much for confirming that. I always make
what Tethys did is that he made it where every single city had to have martial fields, and that elven armies had to go through mock battles relentlessly.
Okay, so that's one of the 2 things that I thought he done off the top of my head. So I'm going to retract. All he did was made the elves a bit more martial. He succeeded in kicking the Dark Elves out. And then we have a very, very unfortunate end, which I think speaks to pretty much everything about his rule and the obsessions that he had.
Yeah, I will include one other little note about him, which to put into perspective how brutal he was, when he got into the Shadowlands, which are the what was left of Nagaryth, and they're pushing towards Anlek, and then they push the Dark Elves off of Anlek, and they go towards the Blighted Isle. He did not just say, okay, we're going to push the Dark Elves at. He had every single city the Nagaroth Elves had built over the course of Caradriel's reign and his razed to the ground. He had all the fields salted. He wanted to wipe them from existence. And when he
he also wanted to ensure that should they return later, they would have nothing here. The spirits of the Dark Elves that are destroyed during this period still haunt the ruins of Anlik, what little remains of it anyway. It's truly awful. I think there's a couple of things to say about him, because he is a very easy and obvious look towards saying, dude was insane. He's easy D tier, isn't he?
I want Andy to put on his demon hat and defend Tethys.
Okay, so I'm now going to attempt to defend Tethys a little. It's a hard job, I will be honest, but I do think there is something here that is worth discussing, and that is he was chosen to do what he did by the other kings. He had one job in his rule. They did not care about politics, about the farms, about anything else. They put him in place to do one thing. He did it, and then they killed him.
Yeah. So what Andy
they knew what they were getting their hand. They knew what they were getting in here. They wanted someone to kick out the Dark Elves, and he was 100% successful. He beat the Dark Elves at their own game. This is where the term Dark Elf doesn't really make sense, because he was just as dark as any other Dark Elf. He was wholly successful at his campaigns, and he won completely. He freed Ulthuan of the yoke that it was under in the north, where the Dark Elves had taken it, and he got rid of them. There is, I think, a pretty strong argument to say here that he was wholly successful as the Phoenix King that everybody wanted him to be. And the second he was no longer needed, they killed him.
Yeah, so for the end of Tethys, which is important, he does do a really, really cool thing, which is that through sheer stupid chance or fate, he finds the dragon armor of Anarian, which had been lost for thousands of years. Yep. And he could have taken it for himself, but he doesn't. He gives it to Aurelian, who is the living descendant of Morelian, who is the son of Anarian. So he gives the dragon armor to him, and he's like, "Here, you can have that." And then he goes and he approaches the shrine of Cain. And what happens next is messy, but I would very much agree with Andy that if you read between the lines, what very much needs to happen is that he approaches it, because he was getting ready to invade Nagaroth. Like, he was like, nope, we're going on to Nagaroth. We're ending this. And when he walks up to it, according to the legend, which I'm going to throw a little caveat in here, according to the legend, he stares at the Shrine of Cain, the Widowmaker, for a long time, and then he goes to try and draw it, and he gets killed. And they say, oh, it was a Dark Elf assassin hiding
Dark Elf
that comes out and gets them. Or it was the White Lions that, seeing him go for the Widowmaker, spring forward and cut him in half or whatever. I'm going to be honest. I really think that the story that would actually make the most sense is, I would agree with Andy that he was assassinated, and that I don't even think he went for Widowmaker. I think maybe he was up there, but I think when he was alone with his bodyguard, he had done his job, and they thought to themselves, if he's going to push for the invasion of Nagaroth,
which he was,
which he is, he has to die. And they killed him.
So I don't think that's an unnecessarily unfair conclusion for what happened. I think it's also a legitimate story that he wanted to draw Widowmaker. The dude was he's properly filled with trauma. The likelihood that he would have drawn Widowmaker and then advanced on Nagaroth is almost certain. But I think if you're looking for a spicy story, he was going there to effectively pray to Cain for the war that was to come, because he intended to destroy Nagaroth, and he was not going to stop. And that was not acceptable for those who voted him in the first place. He had one job, he'd completed it, he's now dead. Yeah, sure, it might have been a Dark Elf assassin. Yeah, sure, it might have been he was going to draw Widowmaker and they were all afraid. There's lots of different stories we can run with. But what we can say for certain is, when he'd finished his job, he got killed by elves. Doesn't really matter which elf did it. He was murdered. So what we have is a Phoenix King who was brought into place to be a general and to kick in Dark Elf ass. He comes in, and in his absolute hatred, he does so. And he goes really far further than many of the other High Elves were happy with. And when he was finished, he is murdered. That's this Phoenix King. It's a fascinating place to where you put him, because you could argue he was a wholly successful Phoenix King, but equally,
he did his job.
He was a terrible Phoenix King because he didn't help the people. All he did was turn them all towards war. So many high elves died. So many dark elves died. So many elves died. He was pure Cain made manifest. Arguably, as I've said, more a dark elf than most of the dark elves, which it makes for a super fun dichotomy as to where exactly he sits. I think this is one of the hardest to call so far. All the rest of them seem to have, for me at the least, a sort of natural place where they sort of sat. This one is a proper toughie.
Yeah, and for people on YouTube, so polls are up on both Twitch and
exciting.
YouTube. I do want to say for YouTube chat, YouTube only lets me have 4 options, so I always have to shave a letter off. So in this case, I shaved S off because I haven't seen a lot of people in chat saying they want to go with S. I've seen a lot of like A's to D's. So generally speaking, I have to shave one off.
This is for me. This is a super toughie because he was exactly what the elves wanted when they needed him, and he did it. But was he a good Phoenix King? Did he change Ulthuan? And I think the answer is mostly no, not really. This was an inevitability at some point anyway because of the nature of it all was. If I look at it and I go, was he better or equal to Calador the Conqueror? And it's hard to say yes for me. For me, he's very close to Caradriel, the Peacemaker, just a different version of him. He who came before and after, they're very different versions of the same thing. One, a far more protracted, didn't necessarily do anything great for the elves. Him finishing it off and done. They're almost a pair for me. So I naturally veer to C, but I think I could make just as strong an argument for B or even D and maybe even A. I think I could really vacillate around here, but I think if I had to choose one, and I'm purposely pinning myself down, today I'd go for a C. But if we ever did this again, I think I could pitch for a really easy, very different outcome.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think this one, as like a viewer perspective, and make sure y'all vote. Even if you're on mobile, you can vote. It's very easy. It's just on there. You just click it. This one I think is really fascinating in that I think a lot of viewers' opinions will be swayed based on how they feel about the Dark Elves. Of like, if they are someone that view the Dark Elves as like, oh, the Dark Elves are bad guys, they're genuinely evil, they need to be kicked off Ulthuan because they're bad, they're the bad guys, then they would look at Tethys and be like, no, Tethys is A or B. Whereas if someone looks at it more from perspective of that, the Dark Elves are certainly antagonists for the High Elves, but they're not an objective evil, and it's not worth it to do what Tethys did, then, oh yeah, no, he's definitely like C or maybe even D tier. Which is just, it's really interesting trying to factor what's going through everyone's heads that's watching. Because Tethys is a tricky one. Like I'm with Andy in that I think I would lean. I feel like I would do like a B minus C plus, but I don't know what angle on that.
I find it really hard to land on C. I'm going to argue, particularly when we go into the next one, if it wasn't for Tethys, we wouldn't have our next Phoenix King, because our next Phoenix King could only do what he did because of what Tethys did. So there's quite a lot with Tethys that makes him a tough to pin down. But I think if we just view him on his own merits and the things that he did individually, it's hard to say that he was great for Ulthuan. But what follows could only have happened because of him. So it's a toughie. Ooh.
Okay, yeah. This is actually one of the first ones that YouTube and Twitch chat disagree with each other.
Oh.
Where Twitch went very heavy into C, whereas YouTube leaned on B, but it's very close, so I have to bust out my calculator again. So give me just a hot sec of and it's funny. Tethys, it's funny how important he really is from like a setup perspective, like Andy said.
Totally.
Of that, a lot of the things that he did during his reign had positive consequences in the long run for those that got to benefit from it, but not everyone got to benefit from it. Okay, and then 33 would be 35.
I'm actually really interested because I'm so torn in this one. I think I'm going to be happy no matter what the result is.
Okay, so final counts are for C, 7 people, And for B, B is 48.
And what was the first one? I didn't hear. 47, did you say?
He was 47. He gets into B tier vote.
Oh, so he's a B.
He's a B minus.
B minus, but a B nevertheless. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm quite happy with that because that actually makes the next one harder, because the next one is now for me. It's going to be interesting. Tethys the Slayer. So now we have a quick question between Sotek and I. Who's better between Tethys and Kalidor? I think
that's not even a question.
I agree. I think it's quite clearly Kalidor first, then Tethys, then Caladriel as we move down.
Kalidor is like a really solid B, whereas Tethys to me is a pretty heavy B minus.
Yeah, I think I think that is entirely fair. But if you judge him purely on the metric that he was brought in for, he's S tier. And as ridiculous as that is to say, he is S tier because he was not just slightly successful, he was beyond successful, but it cost a lot.
Yeah. The descriptions of the Blighted Isle being that there was so much gore and death that the elven generals on both the Dark Elf side and the High Elf side were sickened. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. Alrighty, we're on to our next Phoenix King.
Yes, next is probably, I'm going to say it, probably my personal favorite of the Phoenix King. Belcor Hadris, the Scholar King.
Apologies out there for the spelling of Belcor Hadris, and that's not to say I'm making a criticism there, because thanks, Hawk, for setting this up. Just Belcor Hadris has got a slight spelling there.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Google it, you're adults.
Yeah, we are.
He has a long reign, about 1,200 years. 1,200 years. So he has the second longest reign of the Kings. And this is the Scholar King, who is named pretty appropriately. So this is quite literally a repeat of what happened with Anarian, where the Sixth Phoenix Council looked at Tethys and went, "Well, we don't need more of that." And they went, who is the most opposite person in this room? And someone was like, "What about the nerd over there?" And everyone went, "Yeah, the nerd." So Belcor Hadris becomes
about fair, but it's so true.
So he was, what's notable about him is that he is the first Phoenix King that is explicitly called out for being a powerful wizard. That where all the Phoenix Kings before him may have had some ability at magic, they were not very gifted at it. Whereas he is a genuine Prince of Sapphire. And he knows how to use magic big time. And he very much was a defensively focused king. He wanted to build Ulthuan up. And to put it very bluntly, he benefited, like Andy said, he benefited immensely from Tethys.
Yeah.
Because the Dark Elves were kind of frankly left reeling from Tethys's reign and were busy kind of recouping. And invasions would also be very hard from that point onward, because he quite literally destroyed the earth that they would typically land on, making it where even if they did resettle the Shadowlands, they couldn't live off of it like they did previously. So because of that, this reign is often credited as being the start of a second golden age. Belcor Hadris would go on to found the White Tower of Hoeth, which was an insane accomplishment. In almost the entirety of the Warhammer Fantasy world, it is one of the most impressive constructions of magic. It is a bonkers tower. Because most of the stuff you'll see in Total War or other things like that do not do it justice. It is insane to look at. This just what almost looks like a little needle just pointing way up into the sky. And when you get into it, it is a magical space. It allows you to move around in ways that you shouldn't, according to the laws of basic reality, because it is so heavily infused with magic. And hell, just getting to the White Tower in and of itself is very tricky, because it has magical defenses where if you're trying to get to the White Tower, you have to be really it can almost like sense your intent. And if the White Tower judges you inappropriate, you'll just never find your way there. You'll be lost, and you'll see it ahead of you. But no matter how much you walk towards it, you never get any closer, which is fascinating. It's a very, very cool magical construction. But the other big things that would happen is, of course, with the building of this tower, this also leads, of course, to everything with the Swordmasters of Hoeth, who gather at this time, and they gather to the tower where, of course, many wizards and mages study, but swordmasters and many other pursuits. Realistically, from like a roleplay perspective, you would find people studying at the White Tower of Hoeth almost every subject under the sun, and trying to perfect these arts, which allows, if you watch Lawhammer and have been keeping up with Andy's systems for elven paths, is what allows the elves to keep themselves centered. And resist, like, stay away from temptation, stay away from the cravings of Slaanesh and all that. And the really interesting thing here as well is that when it comes to fighting type stuff, one of the fascinating aspects is that Belkor Hadris did fight a war, not as a warrior, but dealt with a war. But his was very interesting because it wasn't a war against the Dark Elves; it was a war against monsters. Because there were creatures coming down from the Anuli Mountains where magic is like quite literally scraping across the mountains. And Belkor Hadris invested very heavily into designing social structures, military structures, certain kinds of roles, make sure there were paid garrisons, people who were trained to track down and kill these monsters that would come down from the mountains and attack elven villages or cities.
In some respects, it's a bit more intelligent than that. Because it wasn't just there was a war with monsters. Those monsters have been kicking around in the Anuli Mountains pretty much forever. What he did was he realized that in this peacetime, it's very likely that as the decades turned to centuries, that the indolence of the elves could return, much as they had done during the course of Belshazzar's rule. So where Belshazzar didn't channel this and allowed things to slowly but surely fall to indolence, he started strongly encouraging the noble lines to prove their valor, to prove their capability and their might by taking down these great monsters, which not only kept them all in peak condition and gave them something to do, it was a little bit bread and circuses as well. It kept everybody enthused. Cut a long story short, he was in many respects channeling elven passions in a way that Belshazzar kind of forgot to do. So during Belshazzar's rule, the cult of pleasure rose and rose and rose. But during the course of Belkor Hadris, he was too savvy for that. It kind of didn't happen. In fact, I'm going to say something that sort of makes me feel a little bit sick here. I'm going to be really hard not to make it the obvious outcome, because the second golden age of the elves, the reason this isn't the golden age is because of everything that happened before. Ulthuan's fucked. It's just proper broken. And in comes Belkor Hadris and he goes, we're broken. So we're going to build up our defenses. We're going to build the White Tower. We're going to record our histories. We're going to start the proper Book of Days, which is the record of all things that ever occurred. We're going to properly defend ourselves. We're going to ensure that all the nobles don't fall to, effectively, Slaanesh by giving them things to do. We're going to bind everyone together again, and we're going to rebuild Ulthuan. And he did. It's as simple as that. His rule has no downside that's worth pointing out, other than 1,000 years passed and he didn't really gain any big territory anywhere. He didn't care. That's not what he was doing. He was rebuilding Ulthuan. This is a real toughie for me because I want to play Daemon's Advocate.
Yeah. I will say, he does also have a hilarious death in a sense. Compared to the other Phoenix games, he does pull a funny, so to speak, which is so when Belkor Hadris dies, which it's not actually recorded what kills him. He almost seems to be implied to also die of old age, but they don't explicitly say it.
Yeah,
he doesn't die in battle, so I don't know what killed him, but something did. But he dies. But when he dies, instead of being buried on like where the other Phoenix Kings are, which, depending on what source you look at, some say the Isle of the Dead, which doesn't make necessarily a ton of sense. Some might say, like, the Shrine of Asuryan or whatever. But he is buried amongst the foundations of the White Tower. And hilariously, his ghost hangs out.
Still there. Yeah.
Still there. Now, you can't find it deliberately, but there are many legends among the students and teachers and whatever of the White Tower that if people are lost, because the White Tower, once again, it's a magical space. If you're not careful, you can actually get lost in there to a genuinely dangerous extent. But if someone is lost or they're looking for a really specific piece of information that's difficult to find in this like miles high tower, that the ghost of a Phoenix King will pop up and be like, hey, just like hook a left and you'll find your way back to the main hallway. Or like, oh, you're looking for that book? Yeah, just go down like a couple things and like hook a right, go down and hook a left, and it'll be on like the third shelf. And he helps people and then just vanishes, which is fucking hilarious.
This one's a relatively easy one to sum. And the summation is this: over 1,000 years of growth, peace, and observance of the fact that they are in danger due to their own over-emotional state, so that it is properly channeled, so that the elves, instead of collapsing, prosper. It is a surprisingly perfect rule. And he is clever, he is intelligent, he has a strong court, and is the first of the Safri Phoenix Kings. That's the Phoenix Kings that come from Safri, where the White Tower is built. And I would argue is something that any later Phoenix King will be desperate to emulate. There's a couple of potential downsides, and I think it's worth mentioning those as the poll slowly but surely pops up. Number one, he continued the isolationism of the elves. The elves rule the oceans. They sink anything that comes out there, and they don't let anything come near them. He leans deep into magic as a primary source of defending Ulthuan, which is no great surprise. He himself is an incredibly powerful mage. And some would see that as potentially a negative, but that's weak sauce. There is very little that I can say with any strength that is negative about his rule. He is also someone who stands in stark contrast to what the End Times claims happens with each one of the Phoenix Kings. He has a good rule that ends well. It was not tormented. He didn't die in horror. He died pretty much in his happy little tower that he had built over millennia. And then he lives there to this day, possibly not even really dead. Who knows with elves? Who can truly understand?
Wouldn't that be the most hilarious lore drop? Is that he didn't die, he just pretended to die so he could retire to the White Tower?
Yeah, I mean, he just sort of faded away, and he's like, "Did you all think I'm dead? Yes, I'm coming back. I'm in the tower."
He's just, man, what a nerd. He's like, all right, I've done it. I want to just go hang out in my house and just help students. I don't want to be a politician anymore.
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to be a surprise where I'm going to settle this one. Is the poll up?
Yes, the polls are up. Yeah.
Okay, now this is almost dull because he is so obviously S tier. He has been more successful than any other Phoenix King. In a world of war, he had peace. In a world where the elves are in potentially danger and decline, he not only allowed the High Elves to prosper and build back their numbers after the horrors of Tethys, he also channeled it in a way that the cults of pleasure weren't a big issue. The darker side of the elven psyche never came to dominate. He understood the elves. He understood the High Elves. He understood the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves during his reign at best did some pirate raids, and they were mostly fended off because he also concentrated in war. He founded the Swordmasters of Hoeth. He kept all the nobles in peak physical condition, always looking for another glory to pursue. Indeed, he sets up pretty much the entire High Elf psyche in its more balanced, better state in a way that none of the previous Phoenix Kings did. You could argue that he was never properly pushed, never properly tested, and thus never had an opportunity to have glory. But in some respects, I would say he had peace because he was bloody good at what he was doing. It had literally nothing to do with the fact that there was peace and thus he thrived. He thrived because he enforced the peace.
Yeah, he made good use of it. I mean, Daniel, yeah that is true. It was... And some you could argue, and I'm sure in the high political courts of Ulthuan society, it could be argued that if it hadn't been for Tethys handing him the situation on a silver platter, he wouldn't have been able to do what he did. But it also just kind of the way it ended up being.
And ultimately, we are judging them by their individual merits, and his individual, regardless of what he was given, a shattered place, and by the end of it,
That one was a mess.
it was a literal golden age. And if we can't put our golden ages at the top, where do we put them? And yeah, it seems a no-brainer to me. But if you've got a different opinion, do bring it out.
The polls are done. Overwhelmingly S tier.
Yeah, not surprised.
Like, it's not even close. Like it was 75% of the chat says S tier. And then 20% said A tier, and then the little tiny bit were B and C's.
Yeah, screw him. So the question is now between us: who's better between Belshazzar and
this is the first one where I'm going, oh fuck.
They're different times, different successes. So my position, if I'm to be as balanced as I can be, is that Belshazzar ultimately failed. He brought about a great golden age after horror, but ultimately he couldn't keep Ulthuan together. And he, because of his inability to do so, allowed the Sundering to follow, even though he wasn't responsible for it per se. Where I would argue on the other side, Belkahadris, interestingly, had no major issue that he left. He succeeded.
The big thing that jumps out at me is it really felt like Belkahadris didn't just understand how to be a good king in the sense of like making good decisions, good policies and stuff, but that he was able to look at the elves and recognize their flaws and account for it. And I think to me that makes him a slightly but notably better king than Belshazzar.
Yeah, I agree. Slightly, but notably. So S tier and at top. That's interesting. I'm loving it.
It's interesting. Ooh. All right. Next up, we have Aethys the Poet.
Unsurprisingly, after the success of Belkahadris, they went, give us more of that, please.
Yeah. So, Aethys of Sapphire was an interesting Phoenix King because he had a very interesting position, which is that the lore quite calmly calls out that he is the first Phoenix King to inherit peace. All the other Phoenix Kings, when they take over the throne, generally shit was not going great.
Yeah.
But Aethys is giving control, and things are going pretty good. And they are basically, the question is, what is he going to do with this? So he rules for about 600 years.
He does.
And there is a really, really interesting, he's an interesting king because he is, like it says, a poet. He's an artist. He is someone that very much called together like the best and brightest creators of Ulthuan and really built up around him a court of writers and playwriters and musicians, composers, but also people that made great constructions, sculptors, and many, many, many works of beauty are created in this time, many of which stand to this day as absolutely iconic things. The city of Lothern goes from being not a super important, almost like a fishing village, to being, quite frankly, the capital of Ulthuan. Lothern is built up into a metropolis during this time, which is a pretty big deal. This is when he starts encouraging the elves to make contact with the outer world. The elves start trading with Cathay again, where elven ambassadors make their way from Ulthuan at Aethys's insistence to make contact with the Celestial Dragon Emperor and open up trade. So he starts reopening the elves' attention. He ends the age of isolationism, essentially. Now, there is the aspect of, because of this, because
it's going to start to get a bit darker.
Being who he is and, inheriting good times and the good times to continue to roll, the cults of luxury begin to make a reappearance. However, Aethys, I forgot what happens to Aethys here. Yeah, Aethys unfortunately, so he had a couple of other little good things going for him, in that like he appointed a Prince of Aurelian to deal with like guarding the gates and everything, and the defense of Ulthuan was maintained. Things are going pretty well. But he didn't do a super great job of keeping an eye on these luxury cults and really dealing with them. He kind of...
I think there's a point here where we can start talking about the previous Phoenix Kings and where they succeeded and failed and compare. Belkar recognized what elves were, and he kept everything in line. He is followed by a prince who doesn't really have the same ability to do so. He is a prince who takes the peacetime and continues, and I would argue makes things broadly better. But the armies slowly go down. They no longer have Belkahadris's push to ensure that there's this martial edge to all things. And the armies slowly run down. Complacency sets in. And as we all know, elves tend to take everything to extremes. So it's not just complacency, it's extreme complacency, because elves tend to do everything +1. They dial everything up to 11. And through the course of that, the return of the cults of pleasure start again. Now, again, depending on your lore time, that means different things. If we're talking the original lore, that means Slanesh. If we're coming into the later lore, that means the darker gods that the High Elves have largely turned away from because they follow the paths of Azure rather than falling into the far darker gods such as Erith, Kael, Cain, and similar. So lots of cults of excess start popping up. And he kind of doesn't even notice because he's living his life in a really lovely way in courts. They're fucking and music and being happy and everything is great. And that ultimately leads to his end. His courts are infiltrated and he is assassinated. And the various folks who were trying to there's a bunch of sword masters who are sent to try and figure out what's going on, and they completely flub it. And
the High Loremaster literally walks into the room, is like, Phoenix King, I believe like these cults are a problem and they've infiltrated. And he goes, oh, they've what now? And his High Chancellor goes, surprise, and stabs him.
So the problem with ranking this one, and it really is a problem, is that Aethys is, broadly speaking, a pretty damn decent Phoenix King. He's not bad. He doesn't do anything wrong per se, but what he does is he misses out on some things that he needs to do right. He keeps the Ulthuan strong to a degree. Ulthuan never collapses into any major war. It's fine.
Ending isolation is a pretty big plus. Yeah. You know, he opens trade back up.
Yeah, he makes Lothern what it becomes later. He brings great wealth to Ulthuan. He does a lot of good. But he also seems to forget the core nature of the elven psyche, and through doing so, his reign at the far end is... Now, I'm going to say something controversial here. It's more elven. Yeah, and by that I mean, the High Elves are only accepting half of what they are spiritually. By the end of it, he's turned them into elves again. We're looking at them in more of a place like Shinar, all the way back at the beginning. They're far more elf, and that allows them to be infiltrated by the darker aspect of the Druki out there. And you could say that this is a weakening, or you could argue that he's actually returning the elves to who they should be. So it's really easy to say, well, he was a bit weak and a bit pants. I'm going to give a slight counter argument to that, because this is one of those kings you could easily go, not that great. See, I mean, he's not shit. I mean, he's not Kalador the freaking second, but, you know, he didn't really do any good. I'm going to try and counteract that because this is the easy place to go. I'm going to go and try and go to a slightly more difficult place. And that is saying that this is probably the first king since the very beginning that was a proper king of the elves, who was accepting of all of the nature of what the elves were. Belkahadris took a different route. He shunned a part of what it was to be an elf to ensure that he could keep the peace. Where this was one who said, no, the war times have passed. We can return to what we were. And that wasn't necessarily a mistake, because come the end of his rule, there was no great disaster. Nothing had gone wrong. Unfortunately, he was assassinated by dark elves. So you could even take a slightly more difficult route here and say, the dark elves saw a threat.
Yeah. So what I will say, honestly, like Andy said, I agree that the only big flaw that Aethys did is because he had such a love for poetry and kind of these like high society artistic aspects, his court became far more influenced by people that were skilled at like song and verse and talking very cleverly. Very what a lot of people, if you played High Elves back in 7th edition, the idea that like your general couldn't be who you wanted it to be. It had to be the character with the highest leadership because they were the person that had like the favor of the Phoenix King. Aethys is really where a lot of that really kicked off again, of that he stopped caring as much about deeds of those in his court as far as like, oh, killing big monsters like they were with Belkar Hadris. He kind of let that fall to the wayside and was more impressed by how eloquent they were and how good at politicking they were. There's a whole thing about how that Prince of Aurelian that I mentioned earlier, that prince ends up going completely destitute and kind of insane because other elves in the court, who are not dark elves, they're just regular, they're actual high elves, they trick him and basically scheme politically to disgrace him using intrigues at court. And he ends up striking down one of them in anger and accidentally kills the guy. And it just absolutely disgraces him and his kingdom falls apart, even though he was an exemplary high elven general. But because he couldn't deal with the intrigue at court, he ended up extremely disgraced. That is probably the biggest weakness of Aethys, but Aethys accomplished amazing things, you know?
He did.
Like, and to put it very clear again, built up what we know Lothern as it is today, which is the greatest city of the elves in modern times, the High Elves. Reestablished trade with Cathay. He reopened diplomacy with the dwarfs. Now, it didn't go like
well.
It didn't go great, but it didn't go horrible.
They're elves and dwarves, of course, it didn't go great.
They were able though to get some like very light trade. They were tolerating each other again. The funny thing about it is that like the elves went and were like, hey, can we have the Phoenix King crown back like 3 or 4 times? And the dwarves kept being like, no. Like, we'll trade with you, but no. So he's an interesting king. To me, he kind of you could feel very interesting ways about him depending on how you look at it. But I'm gonna go ahead and get the polls up running.
So while the polls are going up, I've got a couple of concluding remarks because there's different ways that we can read him. And Aethys is ultimately and most obviously a character who is at his heart a patron of the arts and a patron of that aspect of elven society. And through doing that, it allowed the cults of pleasure, or depending on how you view it, the Kairathy gods or whatever, to come and rise within Ulthuan. And that ultimately led to a shadow war between the sword masters and the various cultists and what they were doing. But that's like really minor stuff in the greater scheme of things going fucked up because it didn't fuck up.
And this happened towards the end of his reign.
Like,
things were really good for like 400, 500
even
years.
then, if he'd reigned further and had been assassinated, it's quite likely that had been incorporated and moved on. So there is a few things that I think are worth pointing out. He was good. He didn't do anything wrong. You could argue he did, but I don't think that argument has much truck. It's very easy to say, oh, because of him, cults of bull. They're elves. Those cults are always going to be there. I would argue that in some respects, he gave them a vehicle to ensure that they didn't dominate. So they were just a part of the elven psyche. The other half of the elven gods are elven gods. Authority, for example, is an elven god and is not a dark elf god. It's an elven god. I would argue that you've got a very strong position here where you could say that one of the reasons that the dark elves killed him, beyond the fact that, you know, he was open to being stabbed, is because they were going to effectively undermine the entire dark elf existence. He was potentially quite dangerous. There's the chance that there would be many rebels amongst the dark elf roots because Ulthuan was returning to what it was way, way back when. And that is not a bad thing for the elves. And ultimately, if you really do dial into what Malekith was supposed to do, you could argue he was doing what the Elven Kings were always supposed to do. Now, did he do anything particularly great? that really stands up above everything else? Not necessarily. Did he do anything that we should look at and go, that was terrible? It got a bit political, but the elves always is going to. It's hard to position. So, is the thing up? Can I go?
Yeah. It's up.
It's up.
Yeah, go vote. Go vote.
I think this is about as clear a B as you can possibly get. Do I think he's anything like an Aryan? No. Do I think that he's Caradriel, the Peacemaker? No. But do I think he sits right in the middle of one of the relatively successful Phoenix Kings? For me, he seems to be pretty much there. But I could easily argue an A. I find it hard to argue a C, but that's only because many people do. And that means that, I mean, I've spoken to many people about the Phoenix Kings, and he's often laid out as but he was a bit useless, wasn't he? I disagree. He just moved the elves in a different direction and away from being high elf per se. Yeah, and that doesn't mean he's necessarily bad.
Yeah, though, I mean, it's like the worst things you can lay at his feet, which if you think about Belcorhadras as well, the elves have been about 2,000 years without a major war. And he let the courts get kind of lax, and he let the Navy and the military get kind of lax. But
although at this point, the Navy is still the most powerful Navy in the world. So it wasn't really that lax.
Yeah, he wasn't great. He wasn't terrible. He was just kind of there.
Yeah, I remember back, because I remember discussing this with Black Library back in the day. While we wait for the vote to finish off, just a small little anecdote. And they were asking what I was going to write, and I was basically going to write, we need to have a lot more detail in this area, because Aethys is bland in a, all he does is set things up to look bad for the elves. And I was going to write him as a significantly more deep Phoenix King, who was much more at one with it all than had been perhaps presented.
I think you may have argued a little too strongly for him. That's very interesting.
Oh, are we getting an A?
Yeah,
we are not, are we?
He is A tier.
Ooh!
Now, granted, it was super close. Twitch actually was the big thing in here. Twitch came in and actually pushed it heavy A.
There you go.
But yeah, that
I'm not disappointed with that. I say it's an easy B, and that was the argument that I made. But I would have
done A as well. I don't hate A for him. It's interesting.
Right, A for Aethys. I'm well for that. I think so. This is where I'm going to get really controversial. I think he's a better Phoenix King than an Aryan.
Right,
which is really funny.
Give me your argument here.
That? An Aryan was only good at one thing, really fucking up his court. He was a crap Phoenix King. He just was. He was only good at fighting. That's all he did. I'm going to argue that if we're just making a Phoenix King, the Aethys is maybe better. I can't believe I'm saying this.
Yeah, when you put it that way, you're not wrong, which is a weird thing to kind of look at him. Like, honestly, Andy's right of that. If you look at it purely from how good of a Phoenix King was he, you look at an Aryan and you go, oh yeah, no.
Yeah, no.
Oh, yeah, no. If I'm looking from a savior of the world perspective, okay, yeah, sure, an Aryan is obviously better. But who was better for Ulthuan as the king? Aethys has an Aryan saved the world, but that's almost more I don't know. I feel like that's more Assurance handiwork than an Aryan's himself. It's like an Aryan, you're cool, but you're just kind of a murder hobo, honestly, dude. Not
unfair. That was an Aryan's job.
Where most people are
I mean, just think of what he did to the court of Nagarath. It was awful. Truly awful. He was not a good king, but he was a good murderer of bad guys.
I think the big thing for me is that if Aethys was not so heavily responsible for the elves returning to the global stage, I would say absolutely not. But that is such a big deal. Aethys really returning the high elves to the world stage, which is huge. That's so
huge. It really is. And also, I would argue returning the high elves to potentially their elven roots, which many would see as particularly dangerous. It'd be a lovely one where if you're writing it, you could easily have had a conspiracy of high elves and dark elves ultimately slipping someone in to kill him. because both sides didn't like what he potentially represented for the future.
Yeah. And the other thing I find really interesting is that when you hear Aethys' story and you get to the assassination, once again, it's fascinating that it wasn't the pleasure cults that killed him. It was a dark elf that killed him.
Absolutely.
Which is think about that. That's a really interesting note of that. It was a foreigner that killed him. Because when you listen, you go, oh, well, he was inept and corrupt, so of course he gets killed by the corruption. It wasn't the corruption that killed him. It was an outside agent, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next we have we have the sad boy. We have
Morvale.
Morvale the Impetuous.
Morvale.
Morvale is a bummer.
Yeah, poor Morvale.
Remember that story we told a few minutes ago about how the High Loremaster of the White Tower of Hoa showed up and was like, there's pleasure cults. And the Phoenix King was like, what? And then he gets stabbed. Well, the one who went, hey, there's pleasure cults. That's Morvale. So he was the High
Loremaster.
Yeah, High Loremaster of the White Tower of Hoa. Pretty big deal. Very accomplished sword.
Yeah, another Safri monarch, which is worth noting. Safri comes to completely dominate. It's also worth noting that Safri brings peace to Ulthuan.
Yeah, Safri had pretty good Phoenix Kings of Belfort Adris to Aethys to Morvale. But so Morvale was a very, very well-educated elf. Like the biggest thing about him is that he's very skilled in magic. He's extremely educated on all the topics. But he didn't have a lot of great political experience, and he also didn't fight in any major wars. So he gets put on the Phoenix throne, and the best way I could put this, there is no elf on the face of the planet who did not want to be Phoenix King as badly as Morvale did not want to be Phoenix King. But he got the job. And his rule is very depressing. Literally, the first thing he does is he goes, oh, okay, a dark elf assassinated the Phoenix King. Let's send a fleet to go attack Naggaroth. The fleet gets completely wiped out. The fleet is massacred. And the High Elves go, oh shit, Naggaroth is not as weak as we thought they were. And then Morvale turns and realizes that because the elves have been at peace for 2,000 years, their navy is much weaker than it had been. It was not nearly as strong, and now the Dark Elves invade, and they retake Amlek. They rebuild the fortress of Amlek, and a big invasion kicks off. And Morvale kind of starts to panic. A lot of the elves panic, but Morvale panics particularly badly. He does not handle stress well, is the best way I would describe him. And Morvale, to his credit, he turns around and he does two things. The first thing that he does is he goes, okay, the cults of lecheries are now an enemy within. And we have an enemy without. We cannot have both those at once. So, Swordmasters of Hoeth, you are now a secret police. You're gonna go track down all these cults, and you're gonna take them out. And they go, okay. But
they were already doing that, though. They were doing that in the previous reign.
But now it's an official act, instead of like a secret one. And the thing is that they keep bringing death warrants for him to sign because a lot of the people they're killing are princes or princesses, like nobles. So he has to, as king, like officially, give the okay to kill these people, which once again, he is not taking well. It's making him very upset and depressed because unfortunately he comes off as extremely empathetic, which is not necessarily a bad trait, but it can be a bad trait, especially when you have an elf's level of emotion. He's by far the most emotional of the Phoenix Kings next to like Anarion and Tethlas. But he is a sad boy. And now, to his credit, in his panic, because there's no other way to describe it, he was literally panicking. He immediately creates the citizen levies. And that he looks at...
That's not quite correct. It wasn't him that created them. He appointed a general, and the general created it. And this, the general in particular, is super important because he ultimately is.
It just says he organized it.
He doesn't personally do it. The general does it. It's Menthius, is that his name? Did you just say that?
I did not, because Menthius is way further down here.
Yeah, Menthius of Caledor. So we've got another Caledorian general, and this is a toughie because this isn't very easy one to really just wail on him. But we've got ourselves an elf who is very sensitive, and is brought in at a dark time. He's the High Loremaster of Sotek, arguably one of the most intelligent elves that have ever existed. And he is put on the throne, and he immediately, against his own good nature, goes, we must do something. We can't allow this to stand. The previous Phoenix King getting murdered. We need to make a punitive attack, and orders it. And he thinks at this point that the Dark Elves are not only in the recline, that they're effectively extinct. So when the fleet lands over there and gets massacred in the Day of Blood, or the Bay of Blood, or whatever the hell he called it, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, and utterly annihilated, the start of everything going a bit wrong starts, but it doesn't go wrong immediately. He, as the Dark Elves swoop in afterwards and assault, immediately appoints Menthius, I think it's Menthius,
Yes,
as
right.
general. Menthius starts the citizen levy, which we mistakenly started earlier by mistake, because it didn't happen a couple of days earlier.
Right, it has a lot of false starts.
Yeah, totally. So he finally puts that into place with the Phoenix King saying so. I'd say the biggest mistake that he makes is arguably going against what Aethys did, in that he clamps down hard on the various cults that are not the Kadai cults, and by doing so causes bloody horror within his own people, from his own people, as the Swordmasters, the very Swordmasters that he himself is supposed to be commanding as the High Lore Master also, although I imagine he kicked out of that job, become effectively secret police witch hunters murdering folk. Now, these are not folk who have fallen to chaos. These are folk who are fallen to what is, as far as they're concerned, Dark Elf gods. And that's a bit wrong.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting is that his reign, which is only, once again, only almost 400 years,
400? Yeah.
383 years. So Morviel's reign is a reign of, maybe hysteria is not the right word, but definitely panic, of fear.
No, I mean, panic. I think more. I'm not sure panic is right, because he never does anything that lashes out in a sort of panicked way.
Well, I would argue that what he does with the pleasure cults is his panic action. Of that, you have elves, like what he does with the pleasure cults has a reaction of elves informing on one another, spying on one another, wondering if are you in one of those cults? Are you a Dark Elf sympathizer? Like, it breeds this air of paranoia. That's what I'm going for. It's a paranoia.
That's very fair. Yeah, because they weren't in the original lore. They were Slaaneshi cults, but that changed later on when they became cults to, yes, some of them were pleasure cults to Slaanesh. Let's just make sure that's super clear, because Slaanesh and the elves are intrinsically linked. But it became the excess cults, which were basically the Dark Elf gods plus Slaanesh. And it all became a bit different, which changes the tone of Morviel's rule, where Morviel's rule is originally he allows Slaanesh to rise, and it later on turned out he cut down hard on anyone who wasn't a pure high elf, and that's not a good look. That suggests behind it all that there's potentially politicians that he was too weak to say no to, and potentially amongst his own. After all, in fact, just think of the politics, how it laid out. In the previous generation, the Swordmasters, when they were underneath the control of Aethys, had to do it secretly, and then they were run by him, which does suggest this does suggest that this was him. It wasn't him being influenced. This was always what he thought was the right thing to do.
That's true.
He was anti-Dark Elf.
Yeah, he was already preparing for it.
Yeah, absolutely. When he took control, he did this on purpose, and that's not panic. That's almost the opposite. Possibly he didn't like what it become, but that suggests it's someone who has researched into the Kadai and only believes in that particular route.
Yeah, so I would say paranoia is the word I was reaching for, but I just couldn't remember it.
Paranoia, I think, is pretty much perfect. But it's also worth noting that for all the Dark Elves did indeed make their great invasion, by the end of his rule, and it's unfortunate how it ends, but Menthius, he successfully kicks them out. He dies, sadly, in the process of that. And our Phoenix King, upon seeing just how many elves had died underneath his rule, in particular, good old Menthius of Calidor, couldn't take it anymore, and kills himself.
Yeah, so
the flame of Asuryan.
A couple of fun things about Morvale is that A, I will say very bluntly, in my opinion, I think him and Mentheus were hardcore lovers. Because the second he hears that Mentheus falls, he commits suicide.
Yeah.
Like that was the thing that pushes him over the edge.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. It's my vote.
Yeah, but some good, like, despite the fact he did not reign for all that long, he did accomplish some big things. He also really dunked up a couple things, but I'll start with the good stuff. So the good things is that under his reign, he makes the High Elf Navy into what it is today. The High Elf Navy becomes incredibly powerful. Like he practically bankrupts the Phoenix Throne, making the Navy as powerful as it can be. And once again, reinforcing, in my opinion, that he cared almost too much about Mentheus, is the reason he does that is because he wants to cut off Dark Elf reinforcements from Nagaroth to save Mentheus from as much fighting as possible around the Griffin Gate. But some other really interesting things that he does is that he actually oversees the completion of the Fortress of Dawn and the Tower of Dusk, which are the two really, really big towers to the south of Lustria and the south.
Yep. That's the first reestablishment of the old Elven Empire to a small degree. Yeah, I quite like that. And it's allowing them to properly rule the waves again.
Yeah. And also, the Fortress of Dawn as well, which is a really big one. He really expands the Elven. So where Aethys opened up trade, Morvale opened up Elven dominance of the ocean militarily, and giving them like towers they could refuel at and like get more soldiers in places where there's soldiers. And if you're someone that remembers that the Southern Chaos Wastes exist, have defenses against Southern Chaos invasions coming up from there. But yeah, like Andy said, the moment he hears that, as far as I'm concerned, his lover and his greatest confidant, his greatest general dies, he simply stands up and he walks into the flame of Asuryan.
Yeah, he does.
Interestingly, making him only one of 3 individuals who walked into it without spells of protection, being Anarian, Malekith, and Morvale, where Anarian makes it all the way through, Malekith throws himself back out the way he came, and Morvale just walks into it and dies.
Yeah, so sad as this whole tale is, we've got to try to figure out how to rank this particular Phoenix King.
Not easy to do.
As Sotek worries about exactly which particular letters he's going to throw up, I'll throw up a relatively brief summary. We have got ourselves an exceedingly powerful mage. He is the High Loremaster of Safri. He's not simply from Safri, a prince of Safri. He is almost pretty much the epitome of everything that is Hoeth on the world. He has been running for many centuries the secret police behind the scenes that were wiping out the cults. He then takes control, and that becomes public. Where beforehand it was behind the scenes, it now moves in front of the scenes. He immediately declares war on the Dark Elves, a war that proves to be foolish. But the second he realizes what's actually happening, he appoints the most capable person around, who we are also suggesting is his lover, as general, and that general goes to war. War has returned to Ulthuan. And as a Phoenix King, he doesn't lose. He doesn't, by the end of his reign, lose parts of Ulthuan. By the end of his reign, they're kicked back out again. And his reign cuts off short because he just couldn't live any longer with all the death and suffering that he had been responsible for ordering. I find it interesting. He's got quite a few pretty big things that he did, whether it's the Citizen Levy, which he was responsible for forming, whether it's the strengthening of the High Elven fleet, which he most certainly did, whether it was the reaching out of the High Elves, bouncing on top of what Aethys had done before, and in some respects opening the doors slightly wider, while simultaneously blocking them off to a degree too. I'm finding him tough because he did some things good.
Yeah, and it's worth saying to his credit that he was, like I said, a very sad boy. He was extremely empathetic, but he also suffered from horrible nightmares. Like he had terrible nightmares every night. And there are some rumors that the Dark Elves were using sorcery to quite literally influence his dreams. Or it could just be that he was a very sad boy. It was just very tragic. But which you can take with that as you will. But I mean, I think I personally waver. Polls up. I think I personally waver between B and C.
I'm in the same place. I'm trying to figure out where to place him, though.
Yeah, he's because for how short his reign was, he was not bad, but like it's a pretty brutally short reign.
I mean, he did a couple of really. I mean, he's called the Impetuous for a reason. He immediately dived in. I'm going to say right. In fact, no, I'm going C. And I'll explain why I say C. Because it might be a surprise to many, given that we've actually said quite a lot of good here. And that's because he didn't handle the cults at all well. He brutalized them. And in many respects, by brutalizing them, he made it more likely they go underground, which made it more likely that they fell to proper excess.
Yeah,
I would argue he is responsible for many of the cults turning to Slaanesh because of his absolutely brutal way of dealing with them, which goes in strong comparison to Aethys before and then Belcahadris before that. He is, I would argue, responsible for many of the elves falling to Slaanesh. That is bad. He is responsible for the Dark Elves invading. That is bad. He is responsible for some good stuff, but all of that good stuff was reactionary because of what he had caused to happen. He didn't put the citizen levy in place because he wanted to. He put it in place because he needed it because they were at war. He didn't build the fleet better because he wanted to. The fleet became better because they were actually at war. So I don't think he was a good Phoenix King. And that's not because he was empathetic. I'm going to argue, actually, his empathy may have been his downfall, and not because he was too empathic, but because he was fighting against it. Because of his empathic nature, he went far too far in an attempt to push against it. Look at what he did to the various other cults. So I kind of feel that it's a C, but it would not surprise me if it ends up being a B.
Yep. And the poll has ended, and he is B. C was pretty strong. Interestingly, he had a good amount of people that actually voted A tier.
Well, he did a lot of good in his time. As I say, he's a toughie.
Yeah, I think honestly, the thing about him is, I think if you were to make a book that really focused on his reign, from like what were the regular Hyos of Ulthuan dealing with, it would be pretty bleak because of the amount of suspicion between like families and communities about like, oh, are they with those cults? And like minding your own business, all of a sudden like sword masters kick down your neighbor's door and go in with swords and they're like killing people. And that being like the environment he's fostering. But we don't really get that examination with the relatively few stories we have of him.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with this, but I'm okay with him being a B tier, but I think he should be at the absolute bottom of B tier.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think B is unfair. I think B is fine. Let's have a little look at who he's beside and compare.
Well, it's really between him and Tethlis.
That's interesting. Tethlis. I think the Tethlis. I've got a bit of a soft spot for Tethlis, I'll admit. I feel very sorry for him. I feel a bit sorry for Morville as well.
I think
that's right.
Yeah, because I think the thing for me is that a lot of Morville's best aspects were not necessarily him. A lot of it was Mentheus. Yeah,
I agree.
So because of that, I'm comfortable putting him below Tethlis, even though Tethlis was quite brutal. All right. We've only got 2 left. We're almost done. So
we're almost there. And a couple of my faves coming up.
Yep. So next up, we have Belhathor the Sage.
Yet another Safri.
Yep. Which, man, they really, really like those. So this one was actually really interesting in that they talk about that this was the first time that the council reached a deadlock. Where the Phoenix Council was really, really, really struggling to pick a king, and they mediated with choosing Belhathor. So Belhathor is actually a very interesting king, because one of the things that it talks about right at the beginning with him is that the Phoenix Council and the princes deliberately picked him because they thought he would be easy to manipulate. And he turned out to be the exact fucking opposite of what they thought he was. where he was a extremely strong-willed individual. Like, he had a plan and he was going to see it through.
Yeah, so what we've got here is a Wizard Prince of Safri. And this is an interesting one because we've got ourselves a Phoenix King who was effectively voted in to be weak so that the various other princedoms could do what they felt that they needed to do without too much interference from what was a relatively ineffectual, powerful wizard, yes, but not necessarily strong-willed in terms of policy. And it turns out they done made a mistake. They made a big mistake because it turns out good old Bel Hathor turned out to be a pretty damn fine Phoenix King. And this is an odd one because there's very little written about him. Bel Hathor is one of the in-betweeners, the ones that don't hang around in one of the great moments. So, for example, some of the other Phoenix Kings. Oh, yes?
I didn't realize Bel Hathor also dies peacefully of old age.
Yes, he does. I mean, the whole end time story is nonsense. Literally nonsense. So Bel Hathor is actually pretty goddamn brilliant. Through the course of his rule, he basically goes, Nagaroth, don't be stupid. It's on the other side of the world, and that's where they live. And there is extreme politicking to take revenge on the invasion in the north. And he cuts that down completely. He's like, yeah, no. And that's pretty much the tenor of his rule. The elves who are isolationist and want to crush the dark elves, they are wiped out. And he's like, no, we should be considering reaching out, trade, returning back to our roots in many respects, into the sort of world that, say, the Belshazzars and the Belcahadrises are more in favor of, which is the expansionist view of the elves, not the isolationist view of the elves. And through the course of his rule, basically, nothing really happens.
So there's a couple of really cool things that he does. The first, being the last Phoenix King of Safari, he calls together a conclave because as he's, like Andy said, he starts looking outward. Which the other Phoenix Kings had done a little bit, but they'd only done it for very.
One thing he did. Oh, yes, sorry.
Again, so where Aethys was like, oh, trade, and Morvale was like, oh, military expansion for defense reasons. He kind of looked around and was like, what exactly is going on outside? That's basically what he said. And so the elves kind of look around and they see humans everywhere. There are humans as far as the eye can see. They look at all the old colonies, humans. They look at like the north, humans. They look at the south, humans. Humans are fucking everywhere. And he goes, okay, so this new race that we've kind of ignored a bit up until this point, we need to deal with them. So what are we going to do? So they kind of start making some contact and stuff and realize some of them are able to be talked to. And so they start opening kind of trade. And some of them are a little on the nastier side. And so realizing that humanity could be a threat, he does two quick things. The first is that he decrees that no one but elves may set foot upon Ulthuan, though he will later change this before the end of his rule. And then the second thing was actually really impressive, is that he calls together a big old conclave of wizards and says, we need to make sure that these humans cannot threaten us. And so they create the Shifting Isles with a big old ritual where they create the myths, they take advantage of the myths of Yivris and create the Shifting Isles, which are a group of literal magical islands that constantly shift where they are, making it virtually impossible for a non-elf to approach Ulthuan from the east, which is a gigantic deal because Ulthuan would have been invaded so many times from the east if they had not done this.
Yeah, I quite like Bel Hathor, and I quite like him because his rule seems measured, it seems careful. He's looking outwards, he sees threats, he responds to those threats. When the rise of the Norse starts becoming an issue in the northern seas, the answer that he creates is one that is very much central to his own roots, which is the magical route through, because he's obviously a prince of Safri and a magical one at that, from the White Tower of Hoeth. He has benefited from the previous work of Belcahadris. The White Tower is there. He is, I think, a fine example of a Phoenix King who didn't fuck anything up. And indeed, this turns into, by the end, him dying peacefully in his bed. He's totally fine. He rules for, what, about 550, 600, something like that? Because he's just poor Findubar, so it must be about that.
Yeah. So yeah, he reigns to 2163, and he only reigns for about 650 years. Like, he's not around for a crazy long time.
Yeah, totally. It's a funny old tale with this one, and he's the one that caused some of the most arguments behind the scenes when we were discussing Ages of Elves, because he's not that old either. And probably he's not that old at all. He's apparently died of old age, which I think actually is answered inside the other, the more recent 8th edition books by saying that just some elves reach a point where they fade away. They just stop. But they're complete. And there's definitely something in that. It's for all. It's hard to pick out anything that he did bad, and it's quite easy to pick out anything that he did good. Pitching him on our tier isn't as easy as it necessarily sounds, because he didn't do anything supremely great. This wasn't a third golden age. This wasn't a point where you go, the elves are in ascendancy in the world, or in politics, or in battle, or in anything else. This is just a super clean rule.
He kind of just maintains the status quo. Like, nothing super crazy happens, nothing super bad happens. They just kind of sail smoothly.
Towards the
end of his reign, he did send out a little prince of Etain named Finnabar to go explore the world. And Finnabar, the seafarer, goes out and explores the world. And Finnabar comes back and says, "Hey, these humans are pretty cool. Like, some of them are pretty nice. We should trade with them, but they need to be able to come here." And he goes, "Okay, you know what, Finnabar, I trust you. That makes sense." So instead of keeping his decree of that Ulthuan will remain closed to everyone, he says Lothern is allowed to have visitors. Humans may visit Lothern, or actually outsiders.
He's a forward-thinking elf.
Yeah,
he's a clever guy.
Not allowed to leave the city.
Yeah, he's a clever guy. He looks at the world and he makes clever decisions. He recognizes that the elves are part of a wider world, and he makes policy that's based on that. He opens relations with most of the old world. He opens relations with the world in general. He is, I think, a fine example of a Phoenix King. And I know I've tried to take some relatively spicy views as we go on, but that's difficult here because there's not a lot written about him to begin with. So there's not an awful lot to try and reinterpret in a slightly different way. But I think in this case, what we just simply have is a very capable Phoenix King. Now, is he S tier? Did he bring a golden age? That's going to be for you to decide out there. Is he better than an Aryan, the mentalist? That, again, is entirely up to you. Is he better than Aethys the poet? Probably better than Aethys the poet. Yes, maybe. But does he go B tier? I think that might be harsh. He seems to have a very capable rule. But out there, you might think differently. Do we have our poll going up?
Yes, polls are up. Yeah, I mean, you may look at this and go, sounds like there's really not a lot on him. So it's like he didn't necessarily do a bunch or was necessarily threatened by a bunch. So,
yeah. And I mean, all he dealt with was raids to the north, and his response was extraordinary. The shifting sands, that will never be a problem again.
Yeah, what's interesting, unfortunately for Belhathor, the biggest weakness of him in the books is that because Finnabar is part of his story, Finnabar takes up like 50% of it.
And it's such a shame.
Instead of him having like his own full page of text.
So where would I rate him? By how he's written in the book, A. However, I actually think S. Because he took the elves to the world. He made Finnabar a thing. That's obviously the case. But I think that he is potentially the most underwritten of the Phoenix Kings. But because he's underwritten, we don't get to see everything that he probably was. So A seems to be the safest bet. But I think if he had the time to be written fully and you could see the political choices that he made, the forming of the shifting sands alone is extraordinary. Truly extraordinary. A feat that literally changes the fate of their entire island.
Shifting Isles is almost up there with like the foundation of no, it is up there with like the foundation of the gates and like the White Tower.
It's just absolutely extraordinary. So it's difficult not to view what little we know of him under anything but the best light. So if he had been given more development, I feel he would have been the easy S and the one that you looked at and went, you know what? He was really good as a Phoenix King. But because we don't have quite enough there, it feels to me like an A. If you pin me down to 1, I would say I've got to stick with what's written, so I'd probably A. But there's a part of me that just feels he should be an S. But you might think he's a C.
Yeah, I would say that I feel like he's a good A+ of like. Yeah, what's interesting is like with the epithet of like the sage. Like I like the idea of him almost being an old man elf. Which would require so much extra information, but I would love to read that extra information.
Yeah, me too.
Especially because he doesn't reign for that long and yet dies of old age, which, granted, we've talked about how it doesn't really make sense, but if you were going to force it to make sense, it would mean like, oh man, he was very, very old when he was elected. But yeah, it's interesting. All right, so looks like pretty solidly A tier from the chat. There were quite a good number of votes for, a lot of votes for S, a lot of votes for B, but A cinches it pretty hard.
Yeah, I think you made the right choice out there. I think A is probably the best route. Now, our question is then, where does he sit between our 3 A's, our Anarian, Aethys, the Poet? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, but it's possible Sotek doesn't agree, but it seems pretty obvious to me. Yeah. I gotta say, clearly the elves should have forced all of their Phoenix Kings to have Bell at the start of the name, because the 3 Bells are great. 100%. The Bell Phoenix Kings are quite clearly the best Phoenix Kings. I'm really finding it interesting doing this, because I haven't done this before. I've talked about the Phoenix Kings in some length, but it's interesting to see where they all land once you've discussed it out and everyone's had a little vote on it, because you can immediately see that the Phoenix Kings that came from a background of Hoth worship, or emulation might be a better way of putting it, of wisdom, of trying to think out the best route, are by far the best Phoenix Kings. The Phoenix Kings that came to war, they follow next because they were often in a terrible position and they either did it well or they didn't. And then you've got the rest.
Yeah. So that leads us to our last pre-end times Phoenix King, who is from the perspective of Phoenix Kings, really interesting, because he is the first Phoenix King that was recommended by the last Phoenix King before him. Of that, Bel Hathor kind of turned to all the princes and was like, hey, when I die, pick Finnebar. And they all went, okay, boss.
Seriously, pick Finnebar. He's clearly the best route forward for us. And there's no reason for that, because Finnebar's character is already established. He's well known in Ulthuan. He's pretty much Finnebar the Mariner, for want of a better description. He has already wandered the world, and he is already, by this point, very well versed in the world in a way that pretty much no other elf is. So clearly, our previous Phoenix King is going, the only way that we're going to be able to survive is to look outwards. And this is a bunch of policies that Bel Hathor himself had already put in place. And he looked to Finnebar and said, this is the elf who can lead us into the next age of who we're going to be.
Yeah, and Finnebar, before he was Phoenix King, got his epithet of Finnebar the Seafarer from the Kingdom of Etain, which is where Lothern is. He went out and he went to a lot of places. He explored the Empire, he explored Bretonnia, he went into Athel Loren and made contact with them, and it went okay. He visited.
Could have gone worse.
Yeah, he went. Funny enough, his visit with the dwarfs went much better than his visit with the Wood Elves, because the Wood Elves tolerated him. It's the best way it could be put. I would say that, although it's not written in the story, I'd say it's quite likely he visited the Laralorn. That he basically, anywhere that he was at, oh, that sounds interesting, he just went there. And he just wandered by himself for a long time before he made his way back. And as he took over as Phoenix King, he was informed. He knew what was going on in the world, and he was able to immediately start reacting to everything going on and being proactive instead of waiting for something to come to Ulthuan, being able to go, no, we need to do XYZ, of making sure that the Ulthuan navies were ensuring that humanity wasn't going to places the elves did not want them to go, making sure to help the humans where they could, without being necessarily overbearing, but trying to kind of guide them as elves like to do, reestablishing relations with Athelloren. And Finnebar tries really hard to smooth over relations with Athelloren. He doesn't try to force them back into the fold, but he keeps inviting them back into the fold. And he does a good enough job that they just kind of keep politely saying, like, no, thank you. No, thank you. Instead of, shooting them. But for the most part, Finnebar has to deal with a lot of shit because he reigns for about the last 350 years of the timeline. And that's when the Warhammer world starts cooking. We get the Great War against Chaos. We get the invade of Grom the Paunch. We get a big old invasion from the Dark Elves with then like Prince Eltharion counter invading, which led to its own series of ramifications and timeline split, which we don't have time for today. But Finnebar oversees all of this. And hell, there's even alternate timelines thanks to like Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, where Finnebar joins the Council of Light and joins up with, and he goes to Altdorf and he holds court with Karl Franz and Thorgrim. Or you have the timeline of the Storm of Chaos, where he throws in his lot hard behind the Conclave of Light to fight back against Archaon's hordes. You have all these different storylines, and Finnebar, I don't really think we have enough time to go over all of his little excruciating details, but I'll just bluntly say he's a kick-ass king that the end times did so dirty. So dirty.
Yeah. I have a lot of problems with Finnebar, and they're not because of Finnebar. It's largely because of how he'd been written, or not, as the case often was, because the stress always went to frickin' Tyrion and Teclis every single time. So when, for example, the Dark Elf and Chaos invasion occurs, the entire story is all about Teclis and Tyrion the twins. And that's because that was the story that was being written all the way back in the 4th edition of Warhammer. That was the focus that they chose to take, and his affair with the Everqueen. And Finnebar was then left on the outside as that distant figure. But when you look at what has been, everything that has occurred during his reign, he has taken the elves from being thoroughly isolationist, but moving slowly outwards, to moving completely outwards, to making he's not just making treaties with other groups out there. He is literally supporting them and putting them in place. Because of Finnebar, we've got Imperial wizards in the Empire. Because he sent Teclis. He sent him over. He went, off you go, Teclis. And that's because he himself had walked the Empire. He knew the Empire. In fact, he knew all of the old world. Finnebar is a super fascinating character, but most of the best bits of Finnebar are the bits that we just never get to see, because we hear everyone else's story, and the story generally has, oh, Finnebar sent me, or, oh, Finnebar was responsible for this. And you're like, well, why don't we get to see frickin' Finnebar then? He is, I think, for what is apparently one of the greatest Phoenix Kings, who is a great mariner and wanders around. He never leaves Luzerne, apparently, either. He just sits there sending people all over the world to make the world a better place. He does lose a significant chunk of Ulthuan during the Great Wars, but he regains them. How exactly it all falls out, we kind of don't know. Because Finnebar is given like a bit of a tail here and a bit of a tail there, but we don't really get to see the detail, but we do get to see the overall picture. And loosely speaking, this is a Phoenix King who took over in a time when the elves could have gone in one of several directions, but they chose to go with outward, not necessarily expansion, but certainly looking. And trade flourished. The elves themselves, while they may be falling to a certain level of decadence because of who they are in Ulthuan, and their numbers may be dwindling, and they may be getting attacked again and again, are never really overwhelmed until the end times itself comes, where they are a central component to the defense of the world. Finnebar himself eventually carking it, because, hey, that's just what they had to do with him, because they never even used the character well. He was not well handled in the end times, and I will die on that hill with happiness. Yeah, he's pretty decent.
Yeah, a couple of other fun things to bring up about him is that canonically he sees off like a good 3 Dark Elf invasions that that not all of them involve Tyrion and Teclis. Some of them involve other character stuff, but Finnebar is always loosely involved. I will say his best version that we ever got by far is the Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning comic version, where he actually 100%. Does shit. He fights, and he looks like a badass, and he kicks ass and chews bubblegum. Because you have to remember, he wandered the old world with all of its dangers, all of its craziness alone, and he was totally fine. Like this, and it's a shame that he got, especially because when you look at every other group in the every other faction in the setting, their king figures are always playable. Karl Franz, playable. Malekith, playable. Grease's Goldtooth, playable. Mazda Mundi, playable. Orion and Ariel, well, actually not Ariel, weirdly, but Orion, playable. Finnebar should have been playable, and he should have been doing that.
Such a shame.
And he just wasn't.
Yeah.
So
go.
I'll say that there are few Phoenix Kings that had to deal with the variety of threats that he did, from Skaven invasions, Greenskin invasions, Norskin invasions, Warriors of Chaos, demons, because this is when Nakari breaks free and wreaks havoc, killing off the line of Anarian, multiple Dark Elf invasions, a Wood Elf invasion when Orion starts attacking Illyrian. Like, he deals with more shit than any Phoenix King when it comes to the just variety of bonkersness. And he maintains control. He keeps things...
I would say that the reason for that is because that's when we have games.
Yeah, I would agree.
I would argue that you'll probably find that the previous Phoenix Kings dealt with just as much shit, even when they were in a state of complete peace. It's just that they dealt with them in different ways.
But with Finnebar,
they had different issues. Yeah, but come the end times, properly broken. I like Finnebar.
Oh yeah, for anyone that's curious, in the end times, just to show how bad it is, he's apparently having like horrible visions of the end times, and Asuryan like shows him that he just shows him for some reason that him and all the Phoenix Kings are usurpers and that they should feel bad. So he's really guilty and sad and just hides in his throne room until Malekith comes through a mirror and beats him to death with his bare hands. The end.
Yeah. I like him. I think he's a great character. I always found it a bit odd that they never actually created him for Warhammer. He was a character who was clearly as much potential for being on the battlefield as half of the other characters that they chose to create. In terms of what he has done for the elves, he has mostly, on one hand, resisted all the attempts to bring it about until the end times, obviously, which we don't like to talk about too much, or alternatively, on the other side, massively expanded them and their influence as they've reached out across the world again. So it's hard not to say that he is a pretty damn good Phoenix King. He seems like a pretty damn good Phoenix King. And as the poll is getting put up,
pulls up.
I think it's relatively obvious that most will probably S him purely because he's been done wrong, I would argue. And it's often nice to say, well, you were done wrong, make him better. Is he better than Bel Hathor? Is he better than Aethys the Poet? Probably.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And I would say, especially because I don't know. It's one of those things where there's a lot of things. Finnebar is frustrating because there's a lot of really badass things you can understand about him by reading between the lines and making safe assumptions, but you're still being forced to make assumptions, and that always sucks.
Yeah. And he's unlike, say, for example, someone like Bel Hathor, where there's just very little lore there. And we have a lot of lore for Finnebar. There's a lot of detail about him. It's just not about him. It's about other people doing things on his behalf, mostly. He's always in the background, but pretty much everything that you hear about makes you go, wait a minute, he's responsible for the colleges of magic. Huh.
Yeah, the Empire would not...
It's very easy to say that was Teclis, but they were sent over by Finnebar. It's, super interesting.
Yeah, Tyrion and Teclis would not be Tyrion and Teclis without Finnebar.
Yeah, agreed.
He is a very core part of their story, somewhat unfortunately for him.
Yeah, I think that is actually one of the primary reasons why we get so little detail about him, because he would challenge easily Tyrion in terms of his overall capability and the position that he holds. And we all know that certain writers have got their favorites, and they don't like their favorites to have an obvious challenge sitting beside them as to who's cooler. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to not just say that Finnebar has been a massive benefit for the elves and the world in a way that is easy to miss.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it very bluntly that the old world would have fallen during the Great War against Chaos if it had not been for Finnebar.
I agree. Finnebar was fighting a war on multiple fronts, and Finnebar chose to protect the old world, knowing that the old world was a core part of defending the overall world from the potential of a Chaos invasion. So yeah, absolutely, he was great. So yeah, obviously, I'm placing him at S, and I don't think it's hard to place him at S. Now it might be very hard to decide where he goes in S because he doesn't led a great golden age, but in some respects he sort of has in his own way. Where he sits there, we can debate that in a moment, because you might not put him at S. You might go, screw that guy, he's clearly an A.
Yeah, he's interesting, but I feel the Usurper Intide's reveal completely undermines Phoenix King's, making so Malekith is almost rewarded for being shitty just because of his bloodline, but after sacrifice. For me and Andy have talked about this. If you go back and watch our Malekith Lorebeards, which was a long time ago now, that was like a year ago now, that although I think me and Andy both agree that Malekith ending up where he does at the very end makes sense, the way they did it was horrible.
Oh, yeah.
All right, pulls over. He is big S tier. He did not get as much S tier as the other two did. There was a lot of A votes for him, but he is definitely S tier.
Yeah, I think so. Now, our question on our side is, where do we put good old Finnebar? Is he better than Belshazzar the Explorer? Is he better than Belcahadris the Scholar King? Or is he sitting behind them all? Is he much better than Belhathor the Sage?
You know what? I honestly think he should go right here. I think he should go between Belcahadris and Belshazzar.
Yeah, if you consider Belshazzar, he oversaw the collapse in some respects of certain aspects of elven society. Finnebar has been fighting it throughout of his reign, fully aware that it's there.
And he's not a perfect king. He does have his bumps.
I agree. There's not much to think on there. I agree. So are we heading into the end times?
Yes. So we got one last bonus round.
We have one.
So what?
Do we have one? Or do we actually sort of have two? Because
what do you mean?
Tyrion kinda follows up after Finnebar.
I mean, he kinda does, but he never gets the official title.
He doesn't, but he kinda does. I think he deserves a little mention. He's shit. Job done.
I mean, I was gonna say, it's like, listen, if we're doing Tyrion as the Phoenix King, he's D tier, obviously, because as Phoenix King, he was horrible. But he was only Phoenix King for like 2 years.
That was super easy. So if we do include Tyrion in this, because he sort of does, then dude, shit.
I love Tyrion, but Tyrion is like Tyrion right before he draws the Sword of Cain, and he was not having a good time.
Oh no,
that was Tyrion the bad.
Okay, so we have a special mention for Tyrion, but he doesn't go up because seriously, he's not truly speaking the Phoenix King. But we do have ourselves ultimately, arguably, one of only 2 Phoenix Kings that we can properly discuss. Because the rest of them arguably weren't Phoenix Kings, although they were, because Phoenix King is just a creation of the elves, and they were Phoenix Kings. So if anyone tries to tell you that, go, fuck you, they were Phoenix Kings. But that aside, in terms of what Asuryan's plan was, now we come up with Malekith, who Asuryan apparently likes the whole idea of hereditary, because, hey, he was always supposed to be Phoenix King.
Yeah, Malekith, once again, if you go watch our Malekith stream, we wax really lyrical upon this. There is an alternate timeline where Malekith stays true to higher morals, and Belshazzar gives him the Phoenix Throne, and he becomes the greatest ruler ever and defeats chaos.
Agreed.
But that's not the timeline we got. We got a different timeline where Malekith gives in to darker impulses, murders Belshazzar, walks through the flame, throws himself back the other side because, unlike his father, he was not willing to die in exchange for... Because that's the thing. That's a really important thing a lot of people miss, is that it's not really that the flame rejected him. Anarian was also, by that logic, rejected by the flame. Anarian dies. Like, he just flat out dies.
Anarian
dies
and is
willing to
resurrected.
die.
Yeah.
And Malekith, presumably, didn't really understand that part of the story. And was not willing at that point to die. In the end times, he's willing to die, and he makes his way through the flame. But Malekith becomes the Phoenix King, and he's basically Phoenix King for a very short time, only a handful of years, where he fights the final good fight against the Avatar of Cain, Tyrion, and shit hits the fan. And Ulthuan is ultimately destroyed as the vortex is unbound to give the rest of the world a fighting chance against the forces of chaos. And then he and what's left of the elves that survive flee to Athelorn, where he becomes the Eternity King, which is technically a different job.
Yeah, so there's a few things to say here because it is enormously easy to put him at D. Enormously easy. Because it's super easy. Dude's broken. But I'm going to, not because I actually believe most of this, but I'm going to point out a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning. Malekith, or Malarian, or whatever else, is monstrous for a significant proportion of his reign. But he's not monstrous because that is chaotic. He's monstrous because that's what being an elf is. And this is something that many people don't get about elves because they think of good guys and bad guys. And their gods are super complicated. But he is very much a manifestation of a certain type of elf. And elves are not good guys. Any of them are not good guys. They just aren't. Now, in terms of being a manifestation of elven will, he could arguably be deemed as pretty ineffectual. And by that, I mean, he failed to take Ulthuan. He then fled over to Nagaroth, and in Nagaroth, completely failed to take it multiple times. However, he did lead the elves to a position where there were more dark elves than pretty much any other elves in the world that were representing a type of elfdom, for want of a better word, that was wholly successful. And they ruled the waves in much the same way that the High Elves did. And eventually, once he got over his childish rant at not, wanting to die, he becomes what he was always supposed to be, apparently, and leads it into the end of the world.
So can I just say a really stupid comment? When you said elfdom, I was like, oh yeah, elven kingdom. But there's a part of my brain that goes, I feel like there's someone in chat that just perked and went, elfdom? Oh, dumb. Okay, never mind.
So I find this one both super easy and a little bit hard. And I'll explain why. Super easy. He's a fucking D. He's a rubbish Phoenix King. As Phoenix King goes, his last minute redemption seems weak as fuck. The whole story as they wrote it was not very well done. But I also think that's because elves have been written badly in general. They often don't quite get how they are. Many of the writers just sort of make them human, and then you look at the other background, Matt Ward's in particular, which is worth calling out, and you realize there's something so much more there. And Malekith is one of the examples of a character who's often been done a bit dirty, where he's painted as a cackling bad guy, which goes against the entire story that the End Times was trying to tell. If the End Times had told the story that they were trying to tell, if Malekith had been the character that they sort of had built the arc for, I would argue that Malekith was one of the best characters in terms of story, in that he's S-tier story, but he's still a D-tier Phoenix King. Because he's just not a good one. Yeah. But he does pull things together near the end, sort of, maybe.
I will say that, to Malekith's credit, he does reunify the three splintered aspects of elves, minus the ones that fight against him that are just lose themselves to Cain. Like, they're just lost, utterly. He does...
I want to bring up this one because, obviously, well, Super Chat, thanks very much, appreciated. Yeah. He also started it. Um,
I have solved the problem that I started. Great job, me.
Totally. Yeah, he also started, but I think it's a really good point because he did. And I think the one point that most people kind of don't get is that he's right about the vortex. Just like his dad was right about the vortex. The vortex ruins all the elves' chance to take down chaos because it completely stymies them and one of their greatest assets, which is they are uniquely magical. And by bringing it down, the elves can flourish in a completely different way. So when many go, he was just trying to tear down the vortex and that's bullshit. He just wants demons and he just wants to take over. He just wants to... Yes, he does, because that is his birthright. Because he can now control them. He has spent the last 6,000-7,000 years mastering the magic of chaos. That's what dark magic at its heart ultimately is. Demons mean frick all to them. They just get controlled and manipulated and used against them. And Dakari was basically his pet during one part of the setup. Where Dakari was pretty much on a leash almost in one part of the writings of how it was built up for the war against chaos. So there's lots of ways you can view them. But it's hard to say that he was a good Phoenix King.
The only thing I'll say is that if y'all were willing to put Tethys the Slayer in B tier, Tethys and Malekith as a Phoenix King are not that different. They're really not.
Yeah, and I do think there's something to be said here, although I would argue that Tethys was more successful.
I would agree.
He wanted to fight the Dark Elves. He did it. Malekith's job was to become Phoenix King. He did it. It's an interesting setup. I could argue, I think all 5 of those tiers if I wish to do so, but I'm trying to measure him by the same metric that I've measured all of the other Phoenix Kings. And that is ultimately, what has he done for elves as a whole? What has he done for Ulthuan? What has he done for pretty much his time as Phoenix King? And what did he do for the elves? He shattered them utterly. But he also bound them together, and you could argue made them stronger in the end. But I think that the argument is probably weak. I do think, though, that if he'd been written just a little bit better, he would be probably one of the best written characters in the setting, but that doesn't make him a good Phoenix King. And so thus, for me, I find it very, very hard to place him where my heart sort of wants to place him, because I feel like he should have been written in a way that come the end, you'd have gone, holy shit, that story was amazing. He should have been Phoenix King all along. And look what he's trying to do now. Holy crap. The whole Snorri storyline that we've been discussing beforehand, that would have been marvelous. Go check our, that was in the Malekith stream, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, that was the Grombrindal stream.
Which one? That was Grombrindal, that's it. So yeah, go check our Grombrindal stream. And there's an amazing story sitting there. And what could have been told and what Malekith could have become in the end times is, I think, a clear S-tier material. But it kind of didn't happen.
I will
say, stories that we want to happen kind of didn't. So it's hard to put them up.
Yeah, I love the people in chat that are rallying behind that he should be C tier because Calor the Second deserves to be alone in D tier.
You know what? He should be C tier. Because screw that guy. Have we got the poll up?
Yes, it is up and running.
Okay, so yeah, C. I mean, you've convinced me, chat.
This is the most spread vote.
Yeah, I could, as I say, I could probably make an argument for all of them, but I'm trying not to. I'm trying to just stick to the metrics that we sat, which is, what did he do for Ulthuan? Well, he kind of broke it, but he wanted to.
I'm only evaluating him. Yeah, and in my head, I am only evaluating him once he officially became Phoenix King. So it's only when he walks through the flame and successfully, and he's just fighting.
You know what? You know what? That's to a degree fair, because we weren't discussing the other Phoenix Kings and what they did beforehand. And that being the case, yeah, actually.
He kind of loses a lot of the shittiness because he kind of turns into belief when he goes through the flame again.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And that definitely moves him off D for me. Now, obviously out there, particularly those who hate him, they're never going to move him off D. But no, that definitely moves him off D for me. He didn't get enough time to really. I mean, he's certainly not going to rise up to his father.
He was
at A.
I think only Phoenixkin for like 2 years.
Yeah, it's a terribly small amount of time. I'm now thoroughly persuaded on C.
Nice.
I don't think
Andy's opinion wants this entire stream. Nice.
Yep.
Mission
I'm
accomplished.
thoroughly run to C. You've done it. I'm not saying that you. I mean, if he's a D, I will not be surprised at all, because there is a lot of Malekith hate him for very good reasons.
Wow, this is
I think
fascinating spread. On
votes. I think C. I think C at the beginning before they'd rated out. So looking at these, I'm finding it super fun. Like super fun. Because we've got ourselves putting it bluntly, the elves are at their best when they are being calm and looking outwards. They're at their worst when they're warring and seeking revenge. And you can see it.
So he is C tier.
Wow.
Twitch chat, it was 34% C, 31% D, 19% A, and 14% B.
There you go. That's definite C. That's close to B, actually.
Yeah, there was a very interesting spread. Twitch chat was far more solid on C tier. There's actually quite a few S's over in Twitch chat, which is interesting. But all right, I am comfortable putting him at C minus.
Caradriel, the supposed peacemaker. Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm cool with that.
All right, and that, if anyone wants to take screenshots, I'll actually take a screenshot myself, so I'll put it up on Twitter. That is the official tier list for the High Elf Phoenix King, or well, actually no, just the Phoenix Kings, because 2 of them were not Phoenix Kings of High Elves; they were just elves.
Yeah. I really quite enjoyed that. I hope you all did out there as well. I enjoyed it because some of the arguments that I laid were not arguments I expected to make. But as I said them, they seemed very reasonable as we were working our way through them.
Color of the First had me rolling.
Yeah.
Kalidor could have just rolled over for Malekith, and that would have been the right thing to do.
Oh, you got to try at least 1 or 2 spicy takes. I also really enjoyed this because we got to have a good run through lore in a way that we wouldn't do if, for example, we were doing the Lorebeards streams. Where in the Lorebeards, we're very focused, we're answering questions, we're diving deep into one thing. Where with this, we get ourselves a really nice spread of lore chat about a specific subject, and we can go backwards and forwards in it, and everyone out there can have a good chat about it too. I really quite enjoyed that. I hope you did as well.
Yeah, I actually think it's a pretty good spread. I was not expecting Borkahadris to be first. That I'm pleasantly surprised by that.
Okay, did I not? I didn't think the one that surprises me more.
My favorite, but I didn't think they would vote for him to be number 1.
Yeah, I agreed. I mean, the one that surprises me most, and it shouldn't, is Finubar, because he's not really the best Phoenix King in the world. If I'm being blunt, we don't know what he's like. It could be all his court for all we know. In that we don't know. So
yeah, I hate holding him accountable for that.
Yeah, and his rule eventually ends with the end of the world, so it's kind of hard to say that he's an S tier.
No, Malekith's rule ends with the end of the world.
Point taken. That's one that I think arguably a bit. Belkahadris. I mean, Belkahadris has always been pretty much one of the best, as was Belshazzar. Belshazzar, I could have happily had down at an A because Belshazzar, the last section of his rule could most certainly be potentially down there, but such a massive golden age from the hell that he began with, happy with him at S. Inarian's fun because he's the one that you automatically think should be up at S, but having gone through it all, I think he should probably be down maybe B or C.
Yeah, I would have put him lower than he.
Yeah,
I probably would have put Kalidor. The only things I think I would have changed, I would have put Kalidor the Conqueror in A, and I would have put Inarian probably in B or C.
Yeah, Kalidor the Conqueror, I'm quite happy with him in B.
Let's get through these because this is a very long stream. So let's get this wrapped up so Andy can go to bed.
Yeah.
Wait, what about me? Let's run a quick poll. You go straight to Z. You are literally just the worst of everything.
Well, token fuck off.
Straight to the boiler room of tier lists. Let's see. We did that one. They're the top of the bell curve. I love that. I love the idea of the elves having a concept of a bell curve, but it works this way instead of the way humans would think it does. That's really funny. First time chatter. Love all the lore. I must say it was Bel Hathor all along.
Hathor all along.
The cowbell was Bel. Yeah. Under whose reign did the Lady of the Lake start her business over in Bretonia? Also, how did the Bretonnian High Elf relationships evolve? Mostly through Bel Hathor the Sage.
Bel Hathor the Sage, near the beginning of Bel Hathor.
Doing the hard labor of it. But it was during Bel Hathor the Sage's reign. But as far as when the ladies start, that would have been
earlier. One more.
Or no, so it would have been Morvale?
The Impetuous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, it's crazy how few of the Phoenix Kings have been really kicking around for like the other races timelines. It's really interesting to think about.
It is.
What would be the impact of any Phoenix going to the dwarves asking for the crown and getting it? If the dwarves willingly gave back the Phoenix crown, that would mean something insane has happened. Yep. Insane.
Yep.
Because for the dwarves, that was the end of a grudge, a huge grudge. And
it's not just the end of the grudge. Thousands upon thousands of dwarfs' blood were spilled and died because of that crown. It is not going back because it's not the symbol of a single grudge. It's a symbol of thousands of dead dwarves. It would take something extraordinary for them to even consider it. And if they did, there would be such a kerfuffle.
Avian, elves look like they really bring that meme to life of the good times make soft men make hard times make hard men make good times. It's a pretty famous trope. I think it doesn't actually work out that way very well when you examine a lot of the details, and the elves would kind of fall into that as well. But because the elves, interestingly, I agree a lot with Andy that it's actually far more about how the kings were dealing with the elves' nature, as opposed to like this quote. Because like this quote would lead you to think that Aethys was a really bad Phoenix King, whereas one of the things we talked about is the evidence doesn't really support that he was actually a pretty good Phoenix King.
Agreed. In fact, I strongly agree with that, and it's one of the reasons why I think Belcahadris, even though you could argue soft times, no, I reckon extraordinary king. Yep. Because he understood what elves were.
Gotta respect the founder of the White Tower, and no, I'm not just saying that because I'm currently living there. Thanks for building my house. It's
completely understandable, Prince Teclis. I agree.
Did the Isles use some allied time lore technology in the White Tower of Hoeth? They used the White Tower of Hoeth is one of those things that could have its own like fun little supplement dedicated to it, and it would be like a really fun book of just like the history of it and how it functions and all the things you could learn there and things. The construction of it was supposedly bonkers. Like it's quite literally said to be like one of the most impressive magical feats.
Yeah,
it took like 1,000 years.
Yeah, totally. And that's for elves.
I just saw Malekith on the Wish. I wish I was joking. Oh, I wonder what Malekith lands. I was joking. Oh, well, I mean, now you know. Okay, just do Dark Elves have citizen levies, especially coolly since it's essentially the population of Nagaryth and the smallest of the 10 kingdoms? So if you're talking about the Nagaryth elves, they do have levies, though many of them are shadow warriors, which are different. Yes. But do the Dark Elves have citizen levies? I would say probably.
I mean, it's a completely different society. So the answer is, broadly speaking, no. But all Dark Elves are warriors.
Yeah, so it's the same effect, but it's not like established principles. So to speak.
It's a very different way. The Dark Elves are the fighters. So but no.
Can we do a tier list for Elders of the Moot? I really wish.
His meat stout heart. We do love his meat.
Yeah, Games Workshop has criminally undervalued the halflings. The roleplay game is quite literally the only thing keeping them alive. And unfortunately, there's very little information on the various elders. Granted, there hasn't been a ton. Halflings actually live for a surprisingly long time, and they haven't been a part of the Empire for like a crazy long time.
1,500 years. And during that time, you probably have had around about 30 Elders of the Moot, I guess.
Yeah, but unfortunately, we only know about like maybe 3 or 4. Maybe. Could we get a Dami High King list? Unfortunately, very similar issue. Actually, this is actually harder because you would think that, like, oh, the High King must always be the king of Karasakarak, and that's not actually true. Different High Kings have come from different holds, so it gets really fucking hard to figure out where they all are. So this is borderline impossible, unfortunately.
Agreed. Pain in the neck. Makes doing this for others difficult.
Yeah, I think this is in referral to Caradryle the Peacemaker. My time has come, but you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
I do like the idea that stress ages elves, but then Rootweaver would have surely died 5 times over by now.
A week.
Let's see. Seriously, it's all good fun. I think to me the delegation thing is highlighted because he did it more than others, but appreciate the view of actually analyzing what he did. Probably talking about Caradryle again. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, we did that. Okay, I think we're all caught up on those. And then the last couple second ones came in. To be frank, Malekith broke the elves, but he did it with determination. Calor the second half-assed his war with the dwarves until he finally had to get involved. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. the determination of breaking things.
Calor the second.
Now do one for the over tyrants. That's even harder because there was actually a surprisingly long period where there were no over tyrants. There stopped being some for a while. Greasus reclaimed the title and kind of almost borderline, like Greasus is very clever and basically brought back the concept of an over tyrant when there had not been one for quite some time. So what you're saying is elves are overexposed. They certainly can be. All right. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you had a really fun time.
That was great.
I had a blast. I thought this was really fun. We came out with a really interesting list. So if you like this, make sure to please hit like, leave comments, reach out to us on Discord and Twitter about like how you felt about it. And if you have any subjects you'd like to see in the future, we'll probably do something different next week. So it won't be a tier list. It'll just be something different. But totally. if you have any idea for a Wednesday stream, let us know. Whether it's like, oh, do a tier list, play a video game, talk about, make an Ever Chosen, talk about this subject that just wouldn't really be appropriate for Lorebeards for whatever reason. Hit us up. We would love to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're sitting out there going, oh, I really wish they'd do this, tell us. We have our Wednesday set up to basically have some fun. That's what it's for. The Lorebeards on Sunday is a relatively structured show where we take a subject, we dive into that subject, we tear it apart and chew it a little bit and spit it back out. Where this is just us chilling with shit that we love. And hopefully chilling with shit that you love as well. So if you have any ideas for stuff that we could mess around with, please do tell us. And as we said before, the best place to do that is over in Discord. We both have our own Discord channels. You've got Sotek's channels and the Lawhammer channels. Do go subscribe to both because they have very different tones. But both of them have some really cool conversations. So do pop over there. There's a Lorebeard section over in the Lawhammer one. Plus there's Warhammer lore. If you want to go chat about stuff, there's loads of places you can dive in there too. But for this in particular, I am particularly interested in other ideas that you might have for things that we can do on Wednesdays, other tier lists you think that we could do, other types of characters we could make, or something completely different. Please do tell us.
Yeah, Darius, we would have to narrow that down a bit because Monster is very broad. we would be here for days. Total War Warhammer 3 co-op win. Yeah, so let us know if you want to see that. And maybe that's something we'll look into doing. Anywho, we're gonna get out of here, especially because it's very late for Andy. It's almost my bedtime.
It's like bloody hell, it's 4 a.m, everyone.
So
I'm role playing in 8 hours with Birdie. I got Warhammery goodness to have. She's about to become. If you haven't seen the latest stream, you won't know. But it's awesome.
I'm so excited. Birdie's going up in the world. Birdie's going up in the world.
Certainly is. Oh, I'm looking forward to that a lot. So
I'm waiting for the inevitable kneel and then a Skaven sympathizer. Stab in the back again.
Thanks all. That was actually the best. Really enjoyed that. Really looking forward to seeing you for the next one. Oh, right. Or Warlord in general is one that would work.
Yeah, that one we could do.
Yeah, Greenskin Warlords would work. In fact, Greenskin might be better because then we can get Grom in as well. That'd be super fun.
Yeah, we can have fun with that. But,
yeah.
All right. you guys on Sunday for Dakala, the denied one. Also, I have decided, and I'm going to talk about Andy with this just briefly after the stream real quick, that I'm going to put up the poll for the Lorebeards to come after the Dakala stream tomorrow so that we can actually be a week ahead, because I think that would be good for us.
That would be good. I know that I've got a Dakala stream to set up.
Yes, you do. All right. See you guys later. Bye.
Yeah, I do. Bye.